No Time to Die has the most crazy and agonizing announcement to release histories of pretty much all Bond films, from original director Danny Boyle leaving the project, to reports of on-set rewriting, to the composer being fired, to injuries while filming, to blowing up the studio, to that weird-as-heck announcement conference where none of the cast seemed to have any clue what they were doing.
Anna, when you first found out you got this role, how did you try and prepare?
I haven't started preparing yet. I don't know how's that gonna go. Yeah, Carrie, any suggestions?
Play it by ear.
And, of course, delay after delay after delay after delay after delay after delay. You get the idea. But finally, in September 2021, No Time to Die was unleashed on the world, and was the excruciating wait worth it according to the fans?
Yes. And no.
I think most of the time Bond fans as a group generally have a reputation of being quite civil and understanding when it comes to differing opinions of the franchise. Octopussy? Yeah, I love that film. I can see how it's not to everyone's taste, though. Die Another Day? Well, it's not for me, but I'm happy that other people find enjoyment in it. Never Say Never Again? That is a film that exists, yeah? Well, mostly. With No Time to Die, I feel like the game changed somewhat, with a lot of very strong opinions and camps emerging out there.
Hey, it's war! Hey, Vanilla, look, I'm afraid I shan't be able to get back for dinner. Huh? There's all the wars broken out.
Now, don't get me wrong, there are people somewhat in the middle ground on the film too, of course, but in my lifetime I've never known a Bond film spark such a polarising passion from people right from the off, and indeed my own experience was, immediately after seeing the film I could think about nothing else for a good few days, and this is the only time that a Bond film has really stayed at the forefront of my mind non-stop for days after first seeing it, and I have an awful lot of opinions, observations, praise and dislike for so many elements of this film that kind of as soon as it came out on home media, I just knew that I had to make this video to excise myself of a lot of the stuff that has been dancing around in the front of my brain for months after seeing this film. Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome to the longest and probably most detailed video you're ever going to find on this channel. Why the need for such a video? Well, I have an awful lot of feelings that I need to excise about this film, and this is a hell of a lot cheaper than therapy, and besides, my Bond fan therapist is fully booked until 2026. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. They say that the nanobots are eternal, but surely the EMP could just wipe them out. Look, this has been months now. I've got patients with real problems. Why don't you just try exercising more, or finding a less stressful interest? Well, I guess. I've always had a bit of a thing for Star Wars. No, not that. No Time to Die represents some of the highest highs of Daniel Craig's tenure as Bond while also representing the lowest of the lows, and through this video I guess my objective is to just really lay it all out, the good, the bad and the ugly, and finally hope to come to some kind of peace regarding this thing, and figure out for myself whether I think it's a perfect end to Craig's tenure as the super spy, or whether maybe he should have just left it well enough alone and sailed off into the sunset at the end of Spectre. Just before we get started and go through No Time to Die scene by scene, if this is your first time visiting this channel, hello, good evening. Please do consider scrolling below and clicking the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button to stay super up to date on future video uploads that I make on this channel. And with all that out of the way, let's get started with No Time to Die. The film begins with the gun barrel sequence, making it only the second Daniel Craig Bond film to do so. Now, if you want my detailed thoughts on this sequence specifically, I recommend finding my video dedicated to discussing all of the Daniel Craig gun barrels, but to be succinct here, I'm a fan of it in general. It has a really different look to it to what we're traditionally used to, but as far as CG interpretations of these things go, I think it's rather swell. Worth noting too that depending on where you're seeing this film, you may or may not see the Universal Studios logo fade into the white iris to begin the sequence. I personally love this particular version. It's such a fun way to start the film, and it's timed so nicely with the music blaring out. I think it's a brilliant touch, and the gun barrel is obviously most notable for lacking the traditional blood trickle. Now, much can be read into this decision, particularly based on where the story is going to go. You could say that Bond misses his target here, and it's some kind of metaphor for how he's going to be burnt toast by the end of the film, and I think that those interpretations are all perfectly valid. I just feel like it was probably a more practical, aesthetic choice rather than thematic. I think it might have been weird if the red had trickled down but then faded away as the gun barrel opens up on the first scene, which is all kinds of whites and greys and very similar to the look of the gun barrel itself anyway. That's enough about the gun barrel sequence though. Let's get talking about the pre-title sequence itself, which is, to my mind, the most narratively ambitious pre-title sequence in all of Bond. These things are traditionally either show-stopping action sequences or intriguing scenes to to set up some of the plot or mystery, or it could be indeed both of those things, to grab the audience's attention before we get into more detailed exposition later on. No Time to Die is certainly the series' longest pre-title sequence by quite a margin, but it's no surprise really, given that it's going to attempt to set up a heck of a lot of stuff that's going to be relevant later on in the thing. So first up, we start in the past. Interestingly, the film does not do much in the way of on-screen text for dates or location names or anything like that, but for the first 2 minutes we have a Tamagotchi, a Walkman, and someone smoking around a kid, so this is definitely the 1990s. This is of course the home of a young Madeleine Swan, and this first sequence is really just giving us a visual representation of the story that Madeleine tells Bond on the train in Spectre.
A man once came to our house to kill my father. He didn't know I was upstairs playing in my bedroom. Well, that Papa kept a Beretta 9mm under the sink with the bleach.
This is certainly the type of thing that I think only the most ardent of Bond fans would pick up on, and I certainly don't think that when they were writing Spectre, that particular scene in Spectre, they were thinking, hee, this is going to be the opening of the next film. So it's not too intrusive a retcon, I don't think. I do think that it works, and it gives Madeleine's little story in Spectre an extra added meaning in this whole Craig arc, so fine. I think they're trying to do some significant retconning regarding this sequence, by the way, in an attempt to minimize Blofeld's presence in Madeleine's story. I always assumed that Spectre was just more than hinting, actually, that Blofeld himself was the intruder in question.
I came to your home once to see your father.
You don't remember that?
But I do.
But now I guess it's just another event that he's talking about. This place must have been villain central in the 90s if Madeleine can't even remember who was coming and going. Anyway, Mrs. White here ain't winning Mother of the Year anytime soon, but I'll be damned if seeing her drunk ass wallowing on the couch, guzzling red wine, smoking and listening to some awesome French pop ballad isn't one of the most relatable characters in all of Bond. Madeleine. Madeleine! Oh wait, I don't have kids. The song is Dans la vie endormie, and I just love it. It might be reductive of me to say this, but I'll say it anyway. It has an almost Tarantino vibe to it that I just love. It feels right out of Inglourious Bastards or something like that. I've listened to this song so much since the film's release, I just adore it. Turns out Madeleine's father, Mr. White, is off working somewhere, and his wife decides that this is the ample moment to reveal to her young daughter that he's actually an assassin by trade before dropping her wine on the floor. And I love how this prompts a very quick moment where Madeleine just looks straight down the camera. I half expect a voiceover to kick in when this happens.
Yeah, that's me. You're probably wondering how I deal with this on a daily basis.
This is a small detail, but I love how when we see young Madeleine, she's talking to her Tamagotchi like it's a patient, like she's telling it it's depressed, and considering she becomes a psychiatrist later in life, I thought that was just a really nice little touch. Anyway, this domestic misery is soon interrupted by a limping masked villain, and this plays like something right out of a horror film. It's really cool, and honestly, not since Octopussy have we had a sequence that feels like it could have been lifted straight from a slasher movie in a Bond film. The masked character reveals himself to Mrs. White, who looks like she's tripping balls as she sees him walking towards her. Oh Christ, I knew I should have stopped on the third wine box.
My name is Safin.
Guy named Lucifer Safin turns out to be evil.
What are the odds?
Safin kills Mrs. White in a pretty brutal moment, which I guess kinda leads to some more potential retconning from the past.
You're protecting someone. Your wife.
She left long ago.
I mean, I've never described a dead relative as having left as opposed to just, died, but maybe this is all subtly hinting at the fact that Mr. White never really learned of his wife's true fate. Maybe young Madeleine went back into the house after this episode and hid the body, sparing her father from the horrific thoughts of the person he loved most in this world dying as a result of his own actions. Or maybe he was a bigamist. So I guess we just have to buy that Mr. White remarried sometime later. I've seen some speculate that the woman sat next to Mr. White at the opera in Quantum of Solace could be his wife, but I must admit I've always just thought of this as being some random lady, but I guess it could be the second Mrs. White, and would certainly make sense in this current timeline. Just as an aside, who the hell would have guessed back in 2006 that this guy would become the most important and influential character besides Bond in all these 5 films? Like, it's crazy crazy to think how much story mileage they got out of this guy and his exploits in the series. Anyway, Safin turns his attention to Madeleine, and I was kind of surprised seeing some of the behind-the-scenes set photos of this particular sequence. They show that it's actually Rami Malek here doing the acting behind the mask, and I mean, I kind of just assumed that this would be a body double and Malek's voice would have been dubbed in later for most of this. We know that Rami Malek's schedule dictated that he couldn't be on the set of No Time to Die all that much, and I always just kind of assumed that they gave the character a mask to get around the fact that they maybe didn't have him as much as they wanted, but it turns out that that's not to be the case, and he wears the mask for a different reason, and we'll come to that in a little while, but suffice it to say, I didn't find it terribly convincing. I think it's a really cool mask, and it's creepy as anything, but I'm not sure if I ever really buy why the character chooses to wear it. He doesn't wear it later on, and there's not much of an in-film explanation as to why he does it here. I mean, we're to realise that he has some kind of skin condition very soon, so maybe it's for vanity reasons, but whatever, Madeleine doesn't seem to be a fan of it either, as she breaks a chunk of it off shooting at Safin. Terrible bad luck on her part that the bullet wasn't just a millimetre or so to the left, because she'd have saved herself an awful lot of problems further down the line if this guy had just died here. But no, it turns out that after being shot at a few times, he's alive, because I guess he wore a bulletproof vest or something. We never really get this confirmed. I know that it's a fairly rote thing to do, but traditionally when characters in films or TV shows get shot and it doesn't kill them because they've got something blocking the bullet, you'll have a moment where they open up their coat and you'll see the bulletproof vest, or they'll take something out of their pocket and we'll see that that was what stopped the bullet. Here they don't do that, and I do find it kind of odd. Or maybe I just read way too much into this moment from the off. We saw Safin with a bullet hole in his jacket in plenty of the trailers and promotional material leading up to the film, and myself and a lot of other Bond fans read into this detail that Safin was going to be something of an adaptation of Ian Fleming's Dr. No character, a prominent detail of that literary character being that he was born with his heart on the right side of his chest rather than the left, and I thought that this meant we would have had some explanation from Safin later on about how the bullet went where his heart should have been, and it didn't kill him, but in a weird way he would kind of thank Madeleine for making him value the gift of life, and that would explain his obsession with her or something like that. But no, it turns out that he was just very well equipped, and that's that. I certainly could have done with some more of an explanation later on about his motivations, but hey, get used to hearing that throughout the course of this review, because here Madeleine runs across the frozen lake to escape. It of course gives way and she's trapped underneath the ice. This does something to Safin, and he ultimately decides that he's going to save the girl, albeit in an incredibly haphazard way. I mean, it straight up looks like he's just shooting at her here, but I think we're supposed to assume that he's shooting around her to create a hole in the ice that he can break and pull her out, though I do kind of like the idea that he's being kind of deliberately haphazard with his shots here, like he's almost leaving it completely up to fate if she lives or dies. She does live, of course, and he pulls her out of the water, and there's a wonderful cut here where we see the grown-up Madeleine swimming in a much warmer-looking climate, and finally, a good 7 minutes into the film, we have our hero, James Bond, back on screen.
Where the hell have you been?
We have a couple of lovey-dovey scenes with Bond and Madeleine here. Obviously, we're picking up with them sometime after the events of Spectre, at the end of which we see the pair drive off in the Aston Martin DB5, and now they're apparently just doing some aimless wandering around Italy, eventually stopping at the absolutely stunning Matera. This location is just gorgeously presented. It obviously gets harder and harder for Bond films to do the exotic travelogue stuff of old, when audiences on large are kind of used to going on holidays themselves, and travel is just such a more viable thing for individuals to go to some of these exotic and beautiful places. But honestly, it's just awe-inspiring. I'd love to go there myself someday, and hey, maybe I'll even be able to write down my own secret and burn it in the festival, just like the locals do. These scenes also work overtime to re-establish Bond and Madeleine's romance. I don't think I'm alone in saying that I was never fully sold on the pair falling in love in Spectre, and I feel like in that film there is a severe lack of romantic frisson between the two, leaving the ending of that film feeling quite cold as a result. So No Time to Die is going to attempt to satiate whiny irritants like me by giving us soft focus vignette shots of the pair driving together, cute couple banter, passionate snogging, and perhaps most importantly of all for fans like us, invoking thoughts of the great Bond romance of old, On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
We have all the time in the world.
And even sampling some of John Barry's classic tune. This is overdrive stuff, because for the story to work, they really want to make sure that we're all very much sold on the love story, and you know what? I am. I'm not overly keen on the score reuse, that's a little bit too gratuitous for me, but speaking as someone who was really not sold on the relationship between these two characters in the previous film, here, I think it works, and I'll go a step beyond that actually, I think it works quite well. Anyway, it turns out that the pair's wanderings are not quite so aimless after all, because Madeleine has deliberately led Bond here so that he can specifically visit the grave of his dead lover, Vesper Lind, who we of course know from Casino Royale, and put his unresolved feelings about her to rest. I thought that was the entire point of Quantum of Solace, but okay. Madeleine makes it clear that in order for her and Bond to have a future together, he needs to make peace with Vesper, and then she will reciprocate by telling him all of her secrets. She writes down the masked man on a piece of paper and burns it. The next morning, Bond dons his finest corduroy suit and heads to the graveyard. Not sure why Vesper is buried here of all places. I thought she was French and worked for the British Treasury, so presumably she lived in England, but I guess maybe her mother's family were from here? There's a family crypt, after all, and based on the names and dates, I'm guessing that Vesper was buried with her mother and grandmother, Saviani being her mother's maiden name, presumably. It's a little weird that Vesper was apparently only around 23 years old during the events of Casino Royale. She must have been one hell of an overachiever to be working in the capacity that she was in at the Treasury, if that's the case. I don't know why they didn't just use the actress's actual age. I mean, it feels like a really odd choice to make her so young. Just one more thing on Vesper's tomb. I genuinely can't believe I have this much to say about this, but here we are. This is going to be one hell of a long video if you couldn't tell. In some of the behind-the-scenes shots of this sequence, we can see that the image used of Vesper on the set is different to the one used in the final film, and thank goodness they changed it. Vesper looks so damn moody in that on-set picture, which coincidentally is the same image that Blofeld used to psych Bond out in Spectre. Or maybe it was all a deliberate callback given what's about to happen, but before we get there I just want to say that despite this not being something I ever felt Bond needed to do, visiting the grave of Vesper, I absolutely adore this scene. Like I say, I figured that the point of Quantum of Solace was about Bond dealing with his grief regarding Vesper and finding some, well, the clue's in the title, solace by the end of the thing. Coming back to Vesper in this way, 15 years after that first Craig film, was never something I thought I wanted, but I'll be damned if the way this brief moment is shot, scored, and acted isn't one of the most emotionally investing moments in the film.
I miss you.
How Craig delivers that line just really tugs at my heartstrings, and this is a bit of score reuse that I actually quite like, the reprise of Vesper's theme from Casino Royale. It's a really small moment, and I know that we're going to get into grander and more elaborate emotional stakes as the film goes on, but just in terms of tugging on my own heartstrings, this is kind of the peak of that in this film for me. The sentimentality is abruptly vanquished, though, as it turns out that Vesper actually requested cremation rather than burial, and Bond is unexpectedly blasted with the atoms of his former lover, and it turns out that this is actually a big old Spectre trap, and that the young local who guided Bond to Vesper's grave was in on the whole thing. I'd love to know exactly when the bomb was initially planted and when this kid was recruited, assuming that there's at least 10 years between the death of Vesper and this opening sequence, and this guy is like, what, 15 or 16 years old? Spectre sure do recruit him young. So it could be tomorrow, it could be next year, it could be in 15 years, but eventually we are fairly certain that this man will turn up, and when he does, all you need to do is press this button and blow the whole thing to Kingdom Come. Any questions? Oh, well, that's very good. Yes, we do have a workplace pension scheme. This is, of course, where the action really kicks off, as Bond is pursued through the streets by the film's main henchman character, Primo, played by Dali Ben Sala. This character has a surprising longevity in the film, and I really like him. I mean, aside from Mr. Hinks in the previous film, he doesn't have that much competition, but he's far and away my favourite henchman character of Craig's era. I love his look, I love his bionic eye, and obviously it's revealed later on in the film that this eye is how Blofeld is seeing the outside world from his prison cell, so presumably it's Blofeld prompting Primo here to tell Bond.
Blofeld sends his regards. You know, Madeleine, she's a daughter of Spectre.
And obviously our hero is somewhat perturbed by this information, so he hightails it back to the hotel, prompting a cool as heck stunt on a motorbike. And I just love how he dumps the bike outside the hotel and just saunters off. I love his walk here, it's so good. I also love the slightly sinister way this hotel porter delivers this line.
Your baggage is already down, Mr. Bond.
As your wife requested.
A rather angry and now untrusting Bond confronts Madeleine, and suspecting that more agents are on the way, the pair set off in the DB5 for some epic pre-title action. I love how, even all the while thinking that Madeleine has possibly betrayed him, he still opens the car door for her before they set off. But of course, we all know from Thunderball that a woman opening a car door by herself is highly suspicious, so I guess if Madeleine had opened the door for herself, we'd have potentially been braced for a moment where she takes off her wig to reveal it's actually Blofeld underneath. So to talk a bit about this next sequence, there's some terrific car stuff here, and it's a delight seeing the DB5 deploying gadgets, and despite there being a good deal of dialogue during this sequence, I think it's able to keep up the pace and excitement really well. I mean, from as soon as the action kicks off with Vesper's exploding corpse, there is a bit of a stop-start nature to it. It feels more like flourishes of action and stunts and dialogue scenes that are all kind of interspersed throughout, so I feel like it doesn't have as accomplished a structure as something like the opening of Skyfall does, I feel, where the whole thing is constantly moving and it has such a great build and escalation to it. But I do think that for what it's doing here, it's all kinds of exciting and a terrific opening sequence to the film. Now, I don't know what level of control Spectre have over Matera, that they have the phone numbers of every teenager in the place, but the only thing that I don't like about this sequence is this little insert where a kid is threatened with death unless he release his sheep to cause some disruption for Bond. I would have been totally fine with this being a bit of incidental sheep walking rather than seemingly a specific contingency element of Spectre's plans, but whatever. So in the event of the grave bombing, the bridge shooting and the motorbike chasing failing to kill Bond, we of course move to plan D, the releasing of the sheep. This is where you come in. Probably the absolute highlight of the whole thing, though, is when the DB5 is forced to a stop in the middle of a square and is promptly blasted from all sides. This scene is absolutely fantastic, and it's such a highlight of the entire film, actually. I mean, it all goes quiet except for the sounds of the shots and the bullet impacts, and Madeleine's flinching and convulsing in terror. Bond is just sat there, kind of having a moment to process this apparent act of betrayal. I love that we're seeing the bulletproof capacity of the DB5 pushed to its absolute limit, and Bond's escape plan of Gatling gun smoke donuts is just phenomenal. It's a signature Bond moment, and the music kicks in such a badass way. It's just sensational. I love this moment, and it works as the action climax of the sequence, because right after this, Bond takes Madeleine to the train station to throw her on whatever the next departing train is. He's sure lucky that no one working at the station caught them walking over the tracks like that, though. I've known stations suspend departures for such reckless passenger behaviour, and it'd be awkward as heck if Bond had to wait around with Madeleine for another hour until services resumed. Though maybe if they did have a little bit of time to wait, Madeleine could have just, convinced Bond that she has nothing to do with this very elaborate assassination scheme. So as much as I do really love this whole sequence, and I'm willing to go with it because they obviously need to separate these two characters in order to tell the story that they want to tell for the rest of the film, but it is a bit of a pill to swallow that Bond is so willing to throw his future with this woman away on the back of Blofeld saying that she was working with them all along, particularly when Blofeld was very much just outed as Bond's personal troll in the previous film. I'm surprised that Bond is so immediately believing of this.
It's Blofeld, my love. Your father would be so proud of you.
I think I kind of go with it largely because of the whole Vesper thing, like dredging up some past feelings of betrayal and Bond not wanting to go through that again, potentially with Madeleine, so I guess I don't blame him for behaving rashly here. It just feels a little bit odd because Léa Seydoux is playing this very sincerely, like her character is innocent in this, and I think that comes through in her performance. There's no duality going on here. She's very much confused and frightened, so it's a bit weird that Bond doesn't seem to really think that there's, there might be something up with this, particularly as all of Spectre seems to be out to kill her as well as Bond, but given how duplicitous Spectre can be, I guess maybe Bond just doesn't think much of this, but as I say, I can go with this setup because it's necessary for them to rearrange the pieces for the story that they want to tell. Believe it or not, I'm fine with swallowing a plot contrivance or two if I'm enjoying the film, and I'm enjoying this so far, so bottoms up. The sequence ends on another just absolute emotional gut punch moment when Bond is saying goodbye to Madeleine, and Lea Seydoux is just acting the hell out of this. Seeing her well up with tears here is just heartbreaking. Her running down the carriage to keep sight of Bond until the last moment. It's another bit where the emotions genuinely got to me, and I credit the filmmakers and the actors for investing me in a relationship in the space of, what, 10-15 minutes that the previous film couldn't do in 90 or however long the characters were on screen together. There's obviously a bit of setup going on here for later on too, as Madeleine grabs her stomach as the train door closes, and Chekhov's stomach grab indicates that she either has terrible indigestion that will become relevant to the plot later on, or she is in fact pregnant. I get the sense that it's kind of 50-50 whether people pick up on this little moment or not, and I'll admit that I did on the first time watching it, but it takes so long to actually get to the reveal that there is in fact a child involved in this situation that by the time we get to that moment, I'd forgotten about this completely, so the surprise of the child reveal later on did work quite well for me. And hey, look, this is one hell of a packed film, and it's going to be some time until we get back to Madeleine's story in this thing. I mean, hey, have you seen how long this video is? There's an awful lot to talk about, and we're only at the end of the pre-title sequence, for God's sake. So yes, 24 minutes into the film, we finally get to the title sequence after the longest Bond opening ever. Though, I will say that it doesn't feel like it, and I feel like that is something that I feel throughout the entirety of No Time to Die. I think that it's phenomenal that for as long as this film is, and it is the longest Bond film of them all by some way, I never feel a lag, and maybe that's a testament to just how much stuff is going on in every scene, but yes, as a pre-title sequence as a whole, I absolutely love this. Daniel Kleinman returns once again to do the title sequence itself, and I have to admit that I didn't quite know what to think about this when I first saw it, but the more I see it, the more I absolutely adore it, and it's such a great companion piece to the classic Maurice Binder sequence from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, with its tridents, its Britannia iconography, hourglasses, vibrant background colours. I love seeing all this stuff rusting and falling apart. It's almost like the Majesty's titles have been pulled out of an old cupboard, but it's 50 years later and everything's a bit tattered and ruined, but it's perfectly repurposed in this context. As much as I like all of the Majesty's homaging during the sequence, I'm not sure that I'm fully down with the use of the Dr. No style dots that appear throughout the sequence, and there's like a silhouetted diver who obviously gives Thunderball vibes at one point. I guess the whole thing is just kind of cherry picking things from the past though. I suppose the only thing in the sequence that I don't much care for is the short bit where we see faces from the past in the gun smoke. Maybe it's because I recognise most of these images from past promotional materials and stills and the like, and it just kind of takes me a bit out of the sequence because I feel like Craig here is trying to sell me an Omega. I absolutely adore the Billie Eilish song. It's one of my very favourites of the entire Bond filmography, in fact, and I know that it's not for everyone. I know that Billie Eilish's singing can be a bit Marmite for some people. Works really well for me. I really liked it the first time I heard it. I really like seeing it with the title sequence, so it's all a winner for me. Once the titles are over, it's a rare bit of expository text that informs us that 5 years have since passed, and we have a scene set up some plot. Absolutely adore this shot, by the way. I think that this film has some absolutely gorgeous visuals in it, and this is definitely one of them. This is like one of those sequences that were commonplace in the Roger Moore era in particular, where we leave Bond for a little while to see some setup for the plot he will eventually become involved in. You know, the stealing of a sub, the hijacking of a shuttle, the sinking of a ship. Well, in this case, it's the workplace bullying of defected Russian scientist Obruchev, played by David Densick, a character who I had no idea was going to be as involved in the film as he ends up being, but I'm quite glad of that, because he's very much a comic relief character, and yeah, he's a bit goofy at times, but I think he's great and funny, and hey, I have paintings of Sheriff J.W. Pepper and Charles...
It's just a jump to the left.
Gray's Blofeld on my wall. I love these kinds of characters in Bond films. The sequence shows Obruchev in league with Safin, who gives the scientist a call to warn him that Spectre are infiltrating the place to secure the weapon, as Safin calls it, and that he must go ahead with whatever they say, and if he does, they won't kill him. That clearly doesn't apply to the rest of his colleagues, though, as this is a pretty brutal scene, where a good few of seemingly innocent people are mown down while Obruchev does as he's told and hands over the weapon, also known as Heracles, to Primo. Just a little sidebar here, I don't know if this means anything to anyone outside of the UK, but Hugh Hugh Dennis is here as Obruchev's colleague Hardy, and this really caught me off guard on a first watch because Hugh Dennis is very well known here from TV, comedy panel shows and sitcoms, and he's a very recognizable face to most people in the UK. So the fact that he's here for a relatively brief, straight role is a little odd. Similarly, his colleague is an actress who is also a familiar face from a lot of British TV, Priyanka Burford, and she was in The Thick of It, Alan Partridge, BBC dramas and stuff, and casting director Debbie McWilliams did an interview where they asked her about, like, the casting of Hugh Dennis, and she just said, yeah, I just like to throw casting curveballs like that. Now, Hugh Dennis was a character in Phoebe Waller-Bridge's Fleabag series, and he's really great in that, and casting director McWilliams does talk about how that familiarity with Phoebe Waller-Bridge was an influence on the casting here, but I just love to imagine that it was part of Phoebe Waller-Bridge's requirement for working on this film that casting choice be made. No, thank you so much, Ms. Waller-Bridge. It's been an absolute pleasure to negotiate with you. All we need is your signature on the dotted line, and... what was that? Sorry, you have one last request? Okay, yes, sure. Hugh who? Oh, okay, yes, well, I'm sure there's a part in the film for him somewhere. No, we already have someone cast to play James Bond. Primo and his men kidnap and escape with Obruchev, and I just love this little bit where they use these magnet suits to flee down a lift shaft before blowing up the place, and yes, this line from Obruchev is so overtly expositional it hurts.
Magnets.
But it's not even the worst offending line in the film in that regard, but whatever, they blow up the floor and it's all really cool, and then it's off to MI6 where we see Naomi Harris's Moneypenny rushing into Rafe Fiennes' M's office to let him know the news. This prompts a rather tense moment, actually, as M gets a bit touchy about Moneypenny potentially spreading the news further, insisting that their story should be that there was a gas leak that caused the explosion in the lab, which is described as not being on the books. It's something that definitely sets up a bit of mystery as to M's anxiety about this whole situation, and it continues to play with Rafe Fiennes' M as being perhaps a bit more morally ambiguous than some of his predecessors. I don't know if it's just because Fiennes has played so many villains throughout his career that it kind of puts me on edge, but I'm always just a little, like, I don't know, with Bernard Lee's M and Judi Dench's M, I never had anything but respect for them, and even though they might not necessarily have been 100% correct in every situation, I never questioned their integrity. Like, they are always going to ultimately work towards the greater good. With Mallory, I feel like he could turn on a dime, and I think that Skyfall played into that a little bit, and this plays into that a little bit too, and it sounds like they might have gone fully on board with making him a complete villain inspector if Fiennes hadn't pushed back on it.
Although I think I can say now that I had to fight off an attempt by Sam in Spectre to make M. I said, I don't want to play M, and then you turn around and make him the bad guy. M is never the bad guy.
Oh, wow. He was going to be on the other side.
I had to have some pretty intense discussions with Sam saying, this is not flying with me.
So was he in league with Blofeld?
No, it was like, yes, he was Blofeld or something, but that was that was a red line for me.
I feel like in No Time to Die, they kind of try to play it a bit both ways, but he does kind of end up being a bit of a Dr. Frankenstein character in this whole Heracles thing, but more on that later. M asks Moneypenny where 007 is, and in a nicely misleading or foreshadowing cut, we go to Bond, who is enjoying retirement in Jamaica. Though with a lack of on-screen text expositing this, it might not be obvious right off the bat where he is. It's weird, but I do think there are shots in this film, like throughout the thing, that feel like they're composed specifically to have some text over it, giving the location, place, name, but the text never arrives. Anyway, this is of course the perfect place for Bond to seek out retirement, given that his creator, Ian Fleming, had a home in Jamaica, and it was of course where he wrote the James Bond novels, and Bond's home here is something of a secluded paradise. It's just stunning. Bond returns home from fishing to find some cigar ash on his porch, and I have to admit that when I first saw this film in cinemas, I thought that this was bird droppings, and I figured it was some kind of elaborate setup for a Dr. No reveal later on, given that in that book the villain is killed by having a ton of bird crap dumped on him, and no, really he is. But sometimes a bit of cigar ash is just a bit of cigar ash, and this obviously acts as a tip-off for Bond that someone has been snooping around his living quarters. He finds the butt of the offender's Delictado cigar, which could or could not be a deliberate callback to Dine of the Day.
I'm here to pick up some Delictados.
On the back of this, Bond seems to know who the person is who is snooping around his place, so so he gets showered and brushes his teeth and heads out. Just as an aside, I really wish we had some deleted scenes or something hinting at what might have been included in this scene at an earlier stage, because we saw all of these behind-the-scenes shots of Bond looking around the place with a spear gun in hand, and these shots aren't in the film, so I suppose initially there was maybe more of Bond investigating, maybe we saw a bit more of his place in these shots, but they were ultimately cut for the sake of time. I dunno, but I really hope that we get to see them in some form someday. Love that we see that Bond still has some secret spy compartments and the like. We see snippets of articles expositing that Blofeld was found guilty and incarcerated, and I also love how this whole thing builds to Bond meeting up with Felix Leiter. It has a nice air of that thing that they used to do in the past where they'd play on the possibility of Felix potentially being a bad guy, and they could do this then because they were always changing the actors. It was always a new face. Here with the returning Jeffrey Wright, they obviously can't do that exactly, but this is a different spin on that format, and I like it a lot. So we have this pair of scenes with Felix and his colleague Logan Ash, played by Billy Magnuson. I love how this character is introduced with such great economy, and you just know that they're playing him as a square right from the off. Seeing his vest through his white shirt, the way he checks his pockets after he's bumped by a passerby to make sure that he wasn't pickpocketed. Obviously, this is in stark contrast with Bond and Felix, who just look so at ease and cool and fit right in. I really like that they don't actually have to do all that much, but you know exactly what kind of character this guy is right from the off, and he does prompt one of my favourite lines in the entire film.
Where'd you find the Book of Mormon?
Anyway, it's exposition time! Felix has met with Bond to recruit him to head to Cuba to pick up Obruchev, who has been spotted in the country coincidentally around the same time that Spectre are planning a big gathering. Obviously, Bond is the guy for the job, according to Felix and Logan, but he's initially a bit reluctant to get back in the game. So I love this scene so much. I love that the bar that they're talking in is called 25, obviously in reference to No Time to Die being the 25th Eon-produced Bond film. Logan Ash provides some funny moments. He's looking so out of place in this setting. I love the game that Bond and Felix are playing, and kind of similar to the pre-credits scene, having to re-establish and strengthen the love between Madeleine and Bond, this scene really has to do the same thing with the friendship with Felix and Bond. For what they're going to do with Felix later on to mean anything, they need to really establish these two as best buddies in a way that we didn't see in either of the pair's previous encounters, where they were really just sort of at the start of their relationship in Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace. I know for some people this kind of pally-pally relationship is a little bit abrupt, particularly compared with how we last saw these characters interact in Quantum of Solace, but I think the pair just have a fantastic chemistry here. This is my personal favourite Felix performance in the entire series. I think Jeffrey Wright's a phenomenal actor, and I think he plays really well here. And I think he brings out some fun traits in Bond in this scene, so there's absolutely no complaints from me, except for that weird moment where they seem to try to mimic each other's accents regarding the pronunciation of package.
I was hoping you could pick up a package. Where's the package?
I can't be the only one to hear that, can I? Like, Craig's pronunciation goes very American on package. I don't quite know why. Are there deleted scenes to explain this? Release the package cut, goddammit! Though some might say we already do have the package cut. It's also interesting how Felix's plea to Bond feels very personal. There's some lip service given to the fact that the pair's elected leaders aren't playing nicely, and while I don't think that Felix is going rogue exactly with this mission, there's definitely an air of off the books about it. Bond rejects the offer and tries to head home only to discover that his truck has been immobilized. Fortunately for him, a sexy lady on a motorbike turns up to offer him a ride. Nomi, played by Lashana Lynch. Now, this character is teased at a few points throughout this Jamaica sequence, and she's initially rather forward with Bond, and they have a little flirting going on. Another one of my favourite lines is coming up.
I'm a diver.
What do you dive for?
I have a thing for Order X.
Well, then you've come to the right place.
The pair arrive at Bond's home, and initially Bond looks like he's gonna get some action tonight, but Nomi takes off her wig and drops the Jamaican accent, and it becomes clear that this character is not destined to be a secondary Bond girl, but rather is revealed to be working for MI6, and is there as a professional courtesy, as she puts it, basically just telling Bond to back off from Obruchev, as she's in the area to extract him herself. The scene ends on quite the bang that she's not just any old 00, but...
I'm 007.
And I think that this is a setup for some great conflict to play out throughout the film. Nomi is very much presented as overly confident and cocky here. She clearly feels like she has something to prove to this guy, and I love how prickly Bond is with her too. Pulling rank by telling her to call him Commander Bond is great, but there's a moment where he genuinely is appealing to her to use some of her own common sense that I think is quite nice.
You need to ask yourself a few more questions.
He's basically saying, look, I know that you're following orders, but maybe you just need to be a little bit objective here, but she's just not interested because she's very much a by-the-book kind of 00. I also love how she drops in the 007 line because she just knows that that's going to be a gut punch to Bond. I really enjoyed the little hint of backstory that Barbara Broccoli revealed in the last episode of the official No Time to Die podcast, explaining how Nomi ended up taking the 007 designation.
And we also sort of had this backstory that no one wanted to take the 00 number, and she went for it, and she got it, and she lived up to it.
I love that little bit of backstory, and I just love that they go with this. There was obviously a lot of unwarranted clickbait, pearl-clutching articles about how a black woman is playing 007, and there was a lot of stuff that was quite deliberately misinterpreting the facts to say that Lashana Lynch was playing James Bond, and obviously all of that kind of stuff is just, it's clickbaiting, right? I'm sure that some outlets did very well and got a nice little spike in their earnings because of the online traffic generated by such alarmist headlines. How they handle the whole 007 designation thing is one of my favourite aspects of the film, and I really like that they went there with this. Casting Lashana Lynch as the new 007 feels so meta, and it's something they've never really been able to explore in the series before. It's exciting new ground to be in, and I love that as much as Bond might dismiss it as being just a number, it's clearly something that does mean something to him. Meanwhile, back in London, M is trying his best to cover his tracks regarding the destruction of the secret MI6 lab, having Q, once again played by Ben Whishaw, examine Obruchev's burnt-up hard drive, and Tanner, again played by Rory Kinnear, dodging calls from the PM. It's here that Bond calls using a phone that Nomi left behind, and I love how he greets M here.
007.
M, darling, couple of things.
Bond.
Calling M darling is such a power move, and I just love the way he speaks to him throughout this scene. We get more of this later on, but just from the off, I love how Bond is like, yeah, I'm retired, and I never quite garnered enough respect for you while you were my boss, so here's the way it is. It's a lot of fun seeing a totally different Bond and M relationship in this film. By the way, I really love Q's lab set in this one. It's kind of similar to how it looked in Spectre, but I love this wind tunnel thing addition, where I guess that this is where they keep the Aston Martins. This particular Aston we never actually see used in the film, but you can barely go a scene in this film without seeing an Aston Martin, so here it is. We get a snippet at what Blofeld, played by returning Christoph Waltz, is up to these days. Bond drops a mention of Spectre, so M asks for the live feed of the villain's prison cell, where he's muttering seemingly random nonsense to himself, or as Tanner so eloquently puts it,
mad as a bag of bees.
Obviously, it's revealed later that Blofeld is communicating with his team through use of a bionic eye, and here he's planning the party that Bond is going to be infiltrating in Cuba, and can you just imagine how irritating it would be if you were Prebo and you just had Blofeld muttering away in your brain all day?
I've already seen this episode and it's not funny at all. Why can't we watch the one where Joey wears all of Chandler's clothes at once? You can't eat these eggs now. You bought them 2 weeks ago. They'll be terribly out of date. Mine is much bigger than yours.
Bond has a contemplative moment before telling Felix that he's in, obviously spurred on at the prospect of getting back in the game, and this is another moment that I love. It's quiet, but it's just great seeing Bond's thought process. To say that this is a super long Bond film, I appreciate that it's not afraid to take these moments to just stop and breathe every once in a while. So Bond heads to Cuba, and from this point on, for the next 20 minutes or so, I am in absolute 007 heaven, and I'll explain why as we go through. I love that Nomi arrives at the same time as Bond, and I love her giving him the middle finger when they see each other from across the harbour. Now, first things first, this Cuba set is phenomenal. This was filmed at Pinewood Studios, and everything about the design of this sequence is just stunning and seamlessly immersive. I adore it. And speaking of adoration, whether you love this film, hate this film, or come slap bang down in the middle on it, I would say there's about a 98% chance that you love Ana de Armas as Paloma, because everyone loves this character, right? Yes, the performance that launched 1,000 pleas for spin-offs. Ana de Armas appears as Bond's ally for this next chunk of the film, and she's sensational. She brings a totally unique, quirky energy to the thing. She and Craig have some great chemistry, I'm sure carrying over from their previous starring roles in Knives Out together, but she's just a fun, bubbly delight. In another world, she would probably have been someone who would sleep with Bond before going out on the mission together, but this film very much seems to want to keep Bond as a one-woman kind of guy. But I feel like similar to how he was with Nomi earlier on, I get the sense that if they were up for it, he'd totally go with the flow, but hey, you know what, he doesn't have anything to prove in that regard at this point, and I like that when it comes to Paloma, he just can't help but smile at her. I feel like he's very much an on-screen translation of how the audience feel about her. The pair share a drink before heading over to the party, and meanwhile, Obruchev is using a sample of Bond's DNA taken from his toothbrush for something. Yeah, remember that shot of Bond brushing his teeth earlier on? Well, Chekhov's toothbrush, if you set up a lovely bamboo bit of kit like that, then you have to pay it off later down the line. Presumably Primo, who we also saw in Jamaica earlier on, went to Bond's to pinch the toothbrush for use here. That's all well and good, but it does beg the question if Bond was even trying to hide away from the world in Jamaica, given that the CIA, MI6, and Spectre were all seemingly able to pop by at various times. But whatever, they've got Bond's DNA, and at this point we're not sure what they're doing with it, but whatever it is, Obruchev is up to some backstabbing, replacing Bond's DNA sample with another, unbeknownst to the watching Primo. Anyway, I think I've said this in pretty much every video where I've talked about this film, but this Spectre party sequence is my absolute highlight of the entire film. It's Blofeld's birthday, because of course it is, so all Spectre agents have assembled to commemorate the event in a bunga bunga party, as Bond so eloquently puts it. This is all kinds of fun, and give me this over the stuffy and boring boardroom meeting we see in Spectre any day of the week. There are dancers, there's a band, there are people in animal masks having orgies like Bond is in the Overlook Hotel from The Shining or something. Michael G. Wilson makes his customary cameo appearance in this sequence, and Bridget Millar reprises her role as Dr. Vogel from the previous film, which is a wonderful little bit of continuity, and I just adore how Blofeld is seeing the party through the bionic eye that is being walked around the place on a pillow on a silver tray by three bald guys, and people are paying their respects to the eye, and oh my God, just tonally, this is exactly where I want my Bond films to be. Is this setup outrageous? Yes, of course it is, and I absolutely love it. It's harkening back to some of the kind of sillier but fun ideas that we'd see in the 60s and 70s Bond films. Is it weird that Bond is attending a party where presumably all of the Spectre agents attending, like, know who this guy is? I imagine he's pretty high up on their wanted list, but for me it kinda harkens back to that line that we hear in From Russia with Love.
They follow us, we follow them. It's a sort of understanding we have.
Even earlier on, when Felix and Logan are trying to entice Bond along on this mission, they're sort of selling it to him as if it's this kind of fun game.
He's leaving out the best part. Spectre.
Come on, it'll be like old times.
And I love that. I love it when the spy stuff is kind of fun and these people look like they're having a good time doing this stuff. Though, my only complaint about this entire sequence is that I would have loved it if they could have fitted in a variation on the "don't touch your ear" line that we heard in a few of the previous Craig Bond films.
Stop touching your ear. Don't touch your ear.
The sequence also features a song that I've come to adore in the form of, and I'm probably going to mangle the pronunciation here, but whatever, Donde Estabas Tu, to the extent that I now own a vinyl with a version of the song on it, and I'm definitely trying to replicate the aesthetics of this Spectre party when it comes to my next birthday. The whole thing builds to an attempted assassination attempt on Bond using what looks like a poison gas in this moment to kill the agent in front of all the Spectre alumni present. This is just one of my favourite shots in the whole thing, by the way, when all the agents are suddenly stood behind Bond and he's just cottoning on as to something's going on. I love how no one is blinking and they all have these neutral expressions on their faces. It's just wonderful. Primo and his extra accomplice appearing with these awesome reflective glasses, and the old school Spectre logo on the ceiling is brilliant too. Oh, I just adore this whole thing. If I may be permitted just one bit of nitpickery, however, I do think things can get a little clunky once Paloma and Bond start having Blofeld's audio channel in their ears too, like his ramblings, kind of treading on some of their dialogue, and I think it's just a little bit too much in a couple of places, but overall, absolutely love this sequence. Anyway, the gas-looking substance does not kill James Bond, but rather starts to take out the Spectre agents, but just in case you missed this incredibly obvious plot point that we're all witnessing, here's a really clunky bit of ADR from Obruchev to confirm this.
It is working, only Spectre are dying.
Some have pointed out that it's a bit odd that the likes of Primo don't seem to be affected by this substance, but I've always kind of taken this as like, okay, it's the big-time Spectre agents that are being killed, like the numbered Spectre agents, and all of the rest of the people who survived this are kind of like their staff and hired goons, you know, henchman hotline kind of stuff. In Primo's case especially, it turns out that he is very much a gun for hire. I also love how once it becomes clear that all the Spectre agents are dying, Blofeld just shuts up. Like, I'd love to have had an awkward cutaway to him just sat in his cell, kind of like, he's obviously seeing this through his bionic eye, so I would love to see his reaction. Farewell, Mr. Bond. My favourite action sequence of the film kicks off here as Paloma and Bond try to get away with Obruchev. This is complicated, of course, by the pursuing goons and a third entity in Nomi, who drops in and attempts to extract Obruchev for MI6. There's obviously a lot of gunplay going on here, and if anything, it's Paloma who gets the most impressive stunts of the sequence, though I do love this, I assume, deliberate callback to one of the best moments from Quantum of Solace. This overhead shot of Paloma killing the goons is terrific, and again, just this character's energy and Bond's reactions to her are a delight. I do wonder if in some version of the script, if it was ever posited that rather than Paloma, we would have had Felix joining Bond on this mission, but obviously it was changed to be a new character at some point. It just feels like this would have been a perfect opportunity to show the pair of friends on a full-on mission together, something we've never seen with Craig and Wright's versions of the characters. Now, I'm not complaining about that, and I'm very happy that we end up with what we get in this film, but given that Ana de Armas was brought in quite late in the game by all accounts, I wonder what the impulse was behind this character, because at the end of this sequence, Bond tells her that she was excellent, and I very much agree with that, but then that's it, she's out of the film. Of course, also kicking ass in this sequence is Nomi, who has some pretty great moments, and I love it in particular when she tells Obruchev that she's...
I'm taking you back to Mother, darling.
And I just love that she's this third entity in this whole fight sequence. Bond and Paloma obviously aren't going to kill her, but I love the bit where Bond shoots out her zipline and she goes crashing into the wall. I could have watched these four tangled up with these goons for a sequence twice the length of this. I love all of this stuff. I know Bond with a machine gun isn't to everyone's tastes, but hey, I grew up in the 90s with Pierce Brosnan's Bond, so it doesn't at all feel out of place to me. And God, when the Bond theme kicks in, when he grabs a gun, slides over that bar and just starts taking out bad guys with such calm swagger and confidence, goodness, I love this. In the battle, Bond and Paloma secure Obruchev and a cigar for Felix, and then the blokes escape in a plane, but I love that this isn't just any old plane, it's the same plane that Nomi flew in on. Like, she's just gonna be so pissed off when she gets back and realizes that Bond has made off with her own escape vehicle. I love it. Bond flies the scientist to a sea trawler, which is acting as a makeshift base for Felix and Logan, and then presses Obruchev for answers. I remember being so exhilarated watching this particular scene for the first time, because, well, we're an hour into the film, and we don't really know any of the details about what the ultimate villainous scheme is, and whatever information Bond gleams here is going to decide the trajectory for the rest of the film, and I'd say that there were a good few possibilities in play at this point. M's role in Obruchev's invention, there's the possibility that Felix might even be involved somehow, but no, it's Logan who is revealed to be the one in league with Obruchev and Safin, and this scuffle between he and Bond is just terrific. Felix is shot and tumbles out of the way, while the blondes have a pretty brutal confined fight. Just a sidebar on Billy Magnussen here, I think he's an awful lot of fun in this part, and a great henchman character, and the Craig era has been kind of barren in terms of great Bond villain henchman characters. Obviously there was Mr. Hinks in Spectre, but that was kind of it in most of the previous films, and I think it's interesting that in No Time to Die we have Billy Magnussen's character, we have Primo, and we have Obruchev, all working under Safin at various points in the film. It's like they're trying to make up for the lack of decent henchmen in Craig's era. Magnussen has these really fun little psychotic flourishes, like when Obruchev kicks him the gun and he lets out this little giggle, and when they're escaping he has a line about being a fan of Bond, and he sounds quite genuine when he says it. I just love it. Bond is trapped below deck with the wounded Felix, while Logan takes off with Obruchev and sets off an explosion on the boat, which promptly starts to sink. It becomes clear very quickly that Felix is being set up to die here. He's losing blood fast, and when the explosion goes off and the water starts tumbling in, it's clear that he's not getting out of this alive. So, Felix's death. I love Jeffrey Wright. He and Craig have great chemistry in this film. I think they're great together in Casino Royale too, and just seeing the character end up as something of a sacrificial lamb here is Tough. I'm glad that they brought him back for this last hurrah, though, and if it was going to be anyone to pull Bond back in for one last job, I'm glad it was him, and not some new character, or indeed a new actor as Felix. Just seeing him drift away in the water, so similar to Vesper's death in Casino Royale, conjures up some residual emotions from that. The music, and then Bond's struggle to get to the surface, pensively thinking while holding the cigar intended for Felix. It actually does all work quite well for me, and yeah, I guess I'm just more sad to see Jeffrey Wright out of the film than anything else. Bond is able to float on a raft until he's picked up by a passing ship, and then it's off back to London, where we see Bond head to a lockup and rip the cover off another classic Aston Martin in the form of the Vantage. I love too how Judi Dench's M's bulldog ornament is there. One wonders exactly how many of these storage lockups Bond has dotted around London, and precisely how many classic Astons he has now. Longtime fans will of course know this car best from its sensational appearance in the 1987 Timothy Dalton film, The Living Daylights. But wait a tick, these Bonds exist in separate universes, do they not? The Craig era was a hard reboot from everything that came before, so how could his version of Bond possibly have such a car when it was only owned by his previous incarnation in another timeline?
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too. Yes.
Yeah, I suggest just not caring, to be perfectly honest, about the continuity of these things. It's just a cool car, and this Bond collects cool cars, apparently, and hey, I'm thrilled to bits that they brought this thing back. It's nice to see cars other than just the DB5 and whatever the Aston Martin model of the day is appearing in this thing. If he'd have pulled off the cover and it had been yet another refurbed DB5, it wouldn't have had quite the same impact. It's nice to see a different era of Bond represented on screen, and I didn't need Mr. Exposition himself to pop up to tell me how this vehicle can exist in this timeline. What bothers me more is that there's a bit of an odd shot in here as Bond pulls off the cover of the car and goes to get into it. We see him on the left, and then the camera pans over, and there's something of a split screen effect where for just a few frames we have double Bond on the screen as he hops into the car, and it's such a specific effect. I wonder if it was done in camera with a double of Craig standing in, or whether it was done with visual effects or what, but it's slightly jarring. It almost gives the impression that someone else has gotten into the car and driven off with it. Well, I'll be damned. Good thing there's that other lockup around the corner with a Lotus Esprit in it. The music that plays over this little sequence, though, may well be my favourite piece of music in the entire score. It's such an awesome version of the Bond theme, and just as a transitionary scene from all of the drama that we had in Cuba and with Felix to Bond rocking up at MI6, I love this little bit, and I think it works really well. I also like the gag where he has to give his name to the clueless guy at the front desk of MI6, and I really love the stuff of Bond walking through MI6, Nomi looking absolutely incensed by it all, and all of the staff dropping their jaws at the sight of the current and former 007 standing side by side. All that's missing here is a confused drunk or a double-taken pigeon looking through the window, and neither of those things would feel out of place, because Nomi is even representing the Roger Moore era here wonderfully in this safari suit. I love that she's wearing this thing. The verbal sniping between the pair is a lot of fun, and I also like how friendly Bond and Moneypenny are here. They have such a lovely chemistry that kind of makes up for the fact that their relationship has never been particularly flirtatious, not in that classic Bond and Moneypenny way anyway, but I think that for the few scenes that they have together, they work really nicely, and Naomi Harris continues to be an excellent player in this series, despite not having all that much to do in this one.
I get why you shot him.
Yeah, well, everyone tries at least once.
Bond is in such a bitchy mood here, and the scene with M is just one of my absolute favourite Bond and M scenes of the entire series. This is a Bond with absolutely zero Fs to give, and this scene is pretty much him just being all like, hey Mallory, look at the allotment where I grow my Fs and notice how there's none for me to give away. This is also a scene where I think the dialogue has such a spice to it throughout. All the stuff like, is the desk bigger, are you getting smaller, my you're thirsty today, it's all such good stuff, and I just like how it gives Bond's relationship with Mallory some edge. Aside from perhaps License to Kill, we've never seen a Bond so openly disdainful of an M before, but at this point in the story and concerning Mallory's role in the creation of this bioweapon, I think it's fully deserved. Bond is here to basically trade the information he has for access to Blofeld, which M refuses, instead deciding to send 007 to investigate how Blofeld has been able to communicate with the outside world.
Scan the whole prison. In fact, scan the whole damn man.
So, I'll bring my gloves.
Not sure I'd be cracking wise at the prospect of probing Christoph Waltz's bum, but each to their own, I guess. All this bionic eye stuff does beg the question, how did they get it to Blofeld in prison in the first place? Was he already wearing it when he was arrested in Spectre, or did they have to smuggle it into him the old-fashioned way? Hey inmate, you got mail. While Nomi goes off to finger Blofeld's various orifices, Bond has a much nicer time by accompanying Moneypenny to Q's house to do some off-the-books investigating. I love how Moneypenny and Q are helping Bond away from the prying eyes of M. It reminds me very much of License to Kill, where the characters were also dedicated in their loyalty to Bond above all else, and I just really like this trio of actors together. I'm very happy that we have this scene, because the chemistry between the three is wonderful. Ben Whishaw really shines in this film in particular. He's responsible for some very funny moments, and can we please just trap him up Pinewood Studios so he has to return as Q until he's an old man like Desmond Llewellyn. Q's home is just designed to perfection. I love this little security porch or whatever it is. At first I thought he lived in a flat, but no, it's a house and there's a doorbell camera, and then guests are buzzed into this porch area and then further buzzed into the main house. It makes so much sense that he'd be super security conscious, but it feels very real. I also just love, well, just everything about this house. I know that Bond lifestyle is a thing, but can we start a subheading of that about Q lifestyle? Because I just want everything here. Everything about this house I love. I love Ben Wishaw's wardrobe throughout this whole thing. Personally speaking, I'm very much more a dog person, and hairless cats creep me out, so I can leave those behind, but I do kind of love Bond's snarky comments at seeing them.
You know, they come with fur these days.
I just love that we're actually seeing inside Q's home. In all of the Daniel Craig films, we get small insights into the lives of some of the MI6 regulars. M in bed with her husband in Casino Royale, then his voice is heard in Quantum of Solace, he's confirmed as being dead in Skyfall. In Spectre, we see Moneypenny at home with a potential boyfriend, and now here, in No Time to Die, we get Q preparing for a date. And I think it's just lovely that we get these little glimpses into these characters' private lives, because they are characters. And hey, this is hardly a new thing. Ben Whishaw saying,
"He'll be here in 20 minutes,"
is no more of an insight than
made one of these for the kids last Christmas.
But as much as I think the MI6 regulars can be overused in awkward ways, like in the climax of Spectre, for instance, I do like it when we get just these little glimpses into their actual lives, and they feel like actual human beings as opposed to just, you know, exposition dumpers. But speaking of exposition, Bond gives Q a USB that he took from Obrachev and then starts helping himself to some of Q's wine. I don't know why, but Bond pouring a glass of wine from Moneypenny and then them just totally making themselves at home always really amuses me. I just love this whole bit. So, the USB contains a heck of a lot of data files containing the DNA info of many individuals. This information fills in the blanks from what Q was able to extract from Obrachev's hard drive earlier on. It even contains all DNA information for all Spectre members, and Blofeld is the only one of the villainous group left alive. Just another aside, on this info about Blofeld, they give his birth date as 04/07/1946, meaning that depending on what year this film is actually set, presumably around 2020 at least, he's in his mid-70s, which is bizarre and totally doesn't match with the idea that he was just a few years older than Bond when Blofeld's dad was teaching Bond to ski. I assume this is some kind of oversight error, but yes, I mean, it's a really weird choice. Anyway, upon seeing the thousands of bits of DNA info on the hard drive, Moneypenny reveals that there have been breaches of databases holding DNA info around the world. Bond is convinced that Blofeld will know who's behind it, but M earlier on said that Blofeld isn't speaking to anyone. Hearing this line prompts a bit of and collar tugging from Q and Moneypenny, as in one of the film's bigger contrivances that we have to swallow, Madeleine Swan has set up practice in London and is apparently the only person that Blofeld will speak with. It is another contrivance swallowing moment, but I guess they need to get Madeleine back into the story, and this is a way that makes it feel kind of connected to what's going on, so, okay, well, bottoms up again. Potentially more problematic is Safin's reappearance into the plot, posing as a new patient of Madeleine's, who she doesn't recognize. Okay, fair enough, maybe she didn't see his full face back when she was a kid, but given the traumatic nature of that event, this guy's particular way of speaking and his unusual skin condition that she did see earlier on when part of his mask was blown off, you'd have thought that these things would have been seared into her brain, but it actually takes him handing over a box with his broken mask in it for her to realize who he is.
I never forgot your eyes.
I can't say the same for you, I'm afraid. I'd forgotten about the whole thing until now.
So in terms of the plot, Safin is here to convince Madeleine to wear a nanobot perfume, available at all despicable retailers, to her next visit to see Blofeld. She initially refuses, but he threatens her.
Why would I do anything for you?
Because I am a man willing to kill the person you love most.
And on a first viewing, you may think he's referring to Bond with that line, but on repeated viewings, it's clear that he's actually referring to her daughter, so Madeleine, of course, acquiesces. Now, I know it hasn't been long since my last Contrivatini, but I might just have to have another one, as I do have to admit, it's very convenient that based on this pair's interaction, years ago, Madeleine would grow up to be the only person on the planet, apparently, that Blofeld will speak to make her the ideal person to execute Safin's assassination plans. And as well as this, I think we're supposed to start buying that Safin is obsessed with Madeleine, feels a deep connection with her, feels like he owns her life after saving her earlier on. All of the above?
Saving someone's life connects you to them forever. The same as taking it. They belong to you.
But specifically 25 years later when they become useful to a very particular part of your villainous scheming.
We'll talk more about Safin's motive, or lack thereof, later on, because for right now, it's back to Bond, who meets up with M on the bank of the Thames in Hammersmith. Very quick sidebar story about this. When this scene was being filmed, like, in this location, I work in an office, like, just up the road from where they filmed this, and I come down onto this bank of the Thames, like, most Fridays for, like, after-work drinks or whatever. Some of these pubs I know really well. Like I say, I literally 5-10 minute walk up the road I work, and of course on the day that they were filming this scene, guess which was the only sick day that I had in all of 2019? Yes, it was that day. Though perhaps that was a blessing for the film, lest I be running up to all of the various cast members with DVDs to sign every 5 minutes. So this is kind of an odd scene. Based on how the pair ended their previous interaction, I'm amazed that M would deem to meet with Bond again, but I think that the point of this scene is to kind of exonerate M from any ethical wrongdoing concerning the whole nanobot plot, explaining away his secrecy about the whole thing as him being concerned that enemies would kill to get their hands on the tech if they knew about it, and he'd be putting people in danger that way, so he had to keep it off the books. I don't think this entirely clears him from potentially being found in breach of the 1925 Geneva Protocol, which prohibits against the use of biological weapons, but you know, who cares about that? Mallory becomes the second M in a Bond film to drop an F-bomb, following on from his predecessor in Skyfall, and much like in that film, launches into a speech about how enemies are much harder to fight these days, existing in the shadows and so on, and I guess this is what causes he and Bond to sort of soften to each other again. They start suddenly sharing information as a recognisable tune starts to play in the background, namely the John Barry theme from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I've seen a lot of Bond fans debate this online, and I guess that I kind of side with the argument that it is perhaps a little bit jarring. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a nice tune, and I guess it's there because Bond is literally rejoining Her Majesty's Secret Service, so the tune reflects that. M also relays to Bond during this scene that despite his information, they were unable to find a shred of evidence implicating Madeleine in any Spectre wrongdoing, and they've been fine working with her to get info out of Blofeld, and Bond just kind of brushes this off for the moment, seemingly not believing it, which feels odd. I feel like he should be more like, how interesting, could you please elaborate on that, sir? But yeah, I guess the bioweapon is a bit more of an immediate issue. Tanner pops up to collect the pair, or something. I don't know how he knew to pick M up from here, but didn't seem to know that Bond would be there too. Is this just M's favourite spot to hang out? It's a bit of a trek from Whitehall, but maybe he's as big a fan of the Hammersmith Riverside as I am. Back to MI6 now for another exposition scene. I can't help but think that some of this stuff could have been condensed in rewriting. It feels like we're darting about around London being drip-fed information that might have been more economically conveyed in half the number of scenes, but there's enough funny business with Q, and now there's this whole thing that Nomi starts to get tetchy when she realises that Bond has been reinstated as a 00 that I really like.
00 what?
So the gist here is that thanks to blood samples Nomi obtained from a funeral of a Spectre agent whose family members also perished after making contact with the corpse, from all this Q has figured out that it's nanobots.
They're nanobots. Right.
As a plot device, I really like the nanobots as kind of a just futuristic enough thing that it feels like it's just on the horizon of our own futures without it feeling too sci-fi.
We're not science fiction, we're in fact science fact.
I would, of course, be remiss not to mention, also, that nanobots were previously used as a plot device in the Pierce Brosnan-era video game Everything or Nothing, where Willem Dafoe's villain used them almost like weaponized metallic termites. In No Time to Die, though, they're kind of DNA attachments that get into a person's body and kill them like a particularly fast virus. M signed off on the Heracles project to target specific enemies of the state. Obruchev has modified the formula to basically target entire families, even ethnicities. There's some moments given to M's remorse, and I get that we're supposed to be thinking that he made a mistake and he's determined to put it right and everything, but still, some of his intentions I find a bit hard to forgive.
It was designed to be the most efficient weapon in our arsenal, passing through people harmlessly before reaching its intended target.
I mean, okay, it's not gonna harm innocent people necessarily, but still, for the nanobots to get to your intended targets, they need to pass through the general public, surely, and later on in the film we find out that once you have the nanobots in you, they're in you for life, so whether or not they're gonna harm you or not, you are still infecting the general public with a substance against their knowing and will, so I think this guy actually needs locking up. Anyway, Bond and Nomi are sent off to interrogate Blofeld with Tanner, and of course Madeleine in tow, who pauses in the restroom for a moment to apply her new scent.
I love your perfume, what is it? It's called Eau de Nanobot.
Another line from Nomi that I really love during this scene, by the way.
If Bond does anything weird in there, you won't be doing me a huge favour, so don't make it too easy for him.
This is of course the first time Bond and Madeleine are meeting in years, and Bond is a bit odd about it, which makes sense. It's an awkward situation, but going in for the handshake is a bit much, and despite M's assurance earlier on that Madeleine had nothing to do with Blofeld's scheme to kill him in Matera, I find it weird that Bond would behave this way if he thought it was even remotely possible that she was guilty. I'd have thought he'd be giving her the silent treatment more than anything else, but okay, I mean, he's a bit snarky with her when they actually get into the interrogation room, but I think that that's just because she left him hanging on the handshake. So this is the Blofeld interrogation scene, and I just love the build-up to Blofeld getting in the room with Bond. The music is so ominous, and I love that he's slowly riding down this little corridor. I think Lea Seydoux is doing great work here, acting all terrified, and indeed, she flees, telling Bond that she's heading home, but not before he grabs her arm, thus transferring the Blofeld nanobots over to himself. Oh, my hand smells lovely now. What are you wearing?
It's Eau de Nanobot, goodbye.
Blofeld's trolley finally wheels into the room, and despite all this build-up of him only talking to Madeleine, she's the only psychiatrist in the world to whom he will speak. He gets into the room and he's like, oh hi, with Bond right off the bat, and Bond begins interrogating him with Craig's performance going into a place that I don't think we've ever seen him go before.
Perhaps you can help me. Cuba was quite the party. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. But then it all went wrong, didn't it?
So I'm going to talk a bit about Craig's performance specifically in this film, because I know that this is a big point of contention in the fandom, and yes, his acting in this film is kind of nothing like what we've seen of his Bond before. I talked about this in my Craig marathon video, but I actually really like that Craig gives a slightly different type of Bond performance in each of his films, and while I think that what he's doing here is more than just slightly different, I do like it a lot, and yeah, you know what, it's his last film in the series, and I'm glad that he has more than 3 words in a sentence to deliver at any one time. Not that I'm going to dog on his performances in any of the previous films, I think he's a really great actor, but so much about his previous ones, particularly in Skyfall, I feel like they're very internalized performances. It's up to Kincaid and M to hypothesize about his past in that film, where he just doesn't want to talk about it.
This is where you grew up. How old were you when they died?
You know the answer to that. You know the whole story.
Here, he's talking to anyone and everyone about everything, and I'm sure that part of Craig's agreement for returning for the film was about having, you know, actual lines to read and scenes to play, but I will say that I think it feels organic because of the film's time jump earlier on. In the pre-credit sequence, he still feels like that stoic man of few words we know from the previous films, and it's only after the 5 years pass of him living his life in Jamaica that he changes a bit, and that feels natural for me. Yeah, I'm sure living alone for all that time and being out of the Secret Service game for so long, maybe he would have found a different side to his own personality after all of that isolation. I can appreciate that it might be jarring for some people, and particularly in this scene with Blofeld, some of his line deliveries seem almost out of character with what we've seen previously, but in terms of an evolution of performance, it makes sense to me, and I quite like him during this interrogation. Anyway, back to the scene, and of course, the fact that we have Christoph Waltz returning as Blofeld.
Yeah, Cuba was a disappointment.
But we all cry on our birthday.
Do we? I don't think we do. So I do like this scene, and Waltz is attempting to do that thing that he became so famous for from Inglourious Basterds, where he's delivering these really nasty, provocative lines in this softly spoken manner, and the tension is ratcheting up throughout the scene. Is he anywhere as good as he was in Inglourious Basterds? No, not even close, and that's a shame, because Waltz himself seems to be aware of his own shortcomings in Spectre, and this could have been a great redeeming moment for his portrayal of the character. I wish that he was more unhinged, scary, threatening, something, but whatever, I still like him here more than anything he did in Spectre. This is nowhere near a defining Blofeld performance by any means, but it's fine, I'll take it for what it is. It does feel a bit odd to me that Bond isn't addressing him as Franz Oberhauser, given that that'd be the name that Bond knew him by the most, surely, but I guess for the audience's sake, it does make more sense to just call him Blofeld, or is that Blofeld?
Just tell me who they are, Blofeld.
Bond attempts to get a name out of Blofeld as to who is responsible for the Spectre assassinations, but rather than that, Blofeld just decides to tell Bond that the whole thing about Madeleine being a part of the Matera assassination, that was all made up. Just did it for the lols, mate. Sour. While it's not out of character for Blofeld to have done all this, given that the previous film did establish him as Bond's own personal troll in a way, the fact that Bond was so easily duped by it is a bit of a contrivance to swallow, but hey, what choice do we have at this point? This provokes Bond to the point that he's ready to strangle Blofeld to death, though he may be subtle on that intent.
Die, Blofeld, die!
Now, I know that that line is from Ian Fleming's You Only Live Twice, and he says it when he's strangling Blofeld in a different context, but oh, it's just so cringy. I think if this has taught me anything, it's that just because something has precedent in the Fleming texts, it does not automatically give it a free pass. It's one of those lines that's fine when you're reading it, but as soon as an actor is actually saying it, it's just like, oh gosh, I'm gritting my teeth, my buttocks are clenching. I think it's really the shoulder thrust that bothers me more than anything else, just how it's timed with die.
Die, Blofeld, die, 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 die.
I don't know, there's something about that just makes me feel like I need to apologise to everyone for it, even though I had nothing to do with it. There is just no sugarcoating it, and I'm sorry. From the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry. I know that it's really cringy and kind of awkward, but it was there in Fleming, so they felt a need to do it here. I can only sincerely apologise from the bottom of my heart for it. Madam, do you have a moment, please? Who the hell was that? And there's nothing to snap you out of murderous intent than a bit of cringe as Bond lets go of Blofeld and Tanner goes ballistic, and quite rightly.
Bond, you have violated the most important rule in the whole bloody playbook.
The choking we can forgive, obviously, but that line, eesh, I shall have to report you to the Minister. But no time for bickering, because when Bond grabbed Blofeld, he of course passed over the Blofeld or Oberhauser targeting nanobots from Madeleine's perfume.
That's a really nice fragrance. Where did you get it from?
It's Odu Nanobot. So this is perhaps not quite the most satisfying of ends for the villain considered to be Bond's arch nemesis. I mean, it happens off camera for God's sake, and it's quickly moved on from. I appreciate that some might be very disappointed by this. Personally, I can kind of shrug and go with it, more so because I don't think that Waltz's Blofeld was ever that good to begin with. If he has to go, then this is as good a way as any, I guess. It's no drop down a chimney stack, but hey, maybe someday we'll have a truly satisfying Blofeld and a truly satisfying Blofeld death in the same film. Meanwhile, Q, complete with gummy worms, has been analysing the data on Blofeld's bionic eye, which includes a full playthrough, apparently, of Prevo's daily activities, and obviously they get through this quick, but I could totally have had an extra 10 minutes in this film dedicated to what Q was seeing here.
Would you like to see Spectre's 9th tentacle?
Oh dear God! Also shout out to the pure campness of this particular line.
Blofeld's eyeball unlocked.
It's through this footage that Q spots a meeting between Primo and Logan Ash, where Logan recruits Primo onto Safin's side. Now, I know that some people don't like this, and Primo did indeed seem pretty dedicated to the whole Spectre thing, and boy, would you need to be dedicated if you were going to be the one wearing Blofeld's eye and hearing his mutterings in your head 24/7, but this is surely a callback to when henchmen were cool with switching employers. Jaws in Moonraker, it's the return of the henchman hotline. Hello, henchman hotline, how can I help you? Oh, hello, Mr. Safin. How are you? Oh, well, I don't mind telling you, we've been absolutely rushed off his feet here. Did you hear about the big Blofeld birthday party massacre? Oh, what was that? You orchestrated it? Ah, Oh, it's a funny small world, isn't it? Well, now that all the villains are dead, there's a big surplus of henchmen, you see. We haven't been this busy since 1977. Funny you should ask, we do have one with a bionic eye, yes, and just for you, we'll throw in the eye for free. Lovely stuff. I'll send over the paperwork right now, and if you don't mind giving us a heads up the next time you plan a big villainous organization massacre, it'd be much appreciated. As for why Primo continues wearing Blofeld's other eye when he leaves Spectre, I don't know, maybe he's vain, or maybe he just wanted to really rub it into Blofeld, who'll have been sat in his cell stewing away while his prime henchman gets recruited away.
You know, I really never liked working for that Blofeld guy anyway.
You know, I can still hear everything you're doing. Bond heads to Q for analysis of whatever the heck is on his hands that killed Blofeld, but the only real point of this scene is to establish that
nanobots aren't just for Christmas.
Which is going to be a big plot point later on, so keep that in your back pocket. In the same scene, Moneypenny informs Bond that MI6 have lost track of Madeleine, and he deliberately misleads everyone by saying he has no idea where she might have gone, before heading to exactly the place where she has gone. Her family home, or holiday home, or something. Bond rocks up in the Aston Martin, and we have probably one of my favourite scenes in the entire film here. Madeleine is Bond's only lead now, so he's here to find out who gave her the nanobots, but obviously this is also Bond's opportunity to tell her how he feels now that Blofeld has revealed that she had nothing to do with blasting him with Vesper's corpse earlier on. The dialogue, performances, music, shot composition, I mean, this is just Bond pouring his heart out. It's beautiful. I think this is an absolutely terrific scene. It tugs at my heartstrings, and I think both of these actors sell it so well. For all of the issues I might have had with their relationship and chemistry in Spectre, it is made up for here. I think these actors really sell you on their love for one another. I don't think that they necessarily have that magic sexual chemistry like some actors have, like Craig had with Eva Green in Casino Royale, but both actors are giving great performances here, so even if there isn't that true spark between them, I still think that as individuals, I believe that these characters mean a lot to each other, and as I say, it's a huge step up from the previous film. Just as an aside, when it does come to that magic sexual chemistry between actors in films, one of the best examples I've ever seen is Pierce Brosnan and Rene Russo in The Thomas Crown Affair. They are just electric on screen together in that film. Check it out, particularly if you're a Brosnan fan. Anyway, the moment is somewhat undercut by the reveal of a 5-year-old child in a shot that probably sent many a cinema-goer gasping and or choking on their popcorn. Of course, earlier on in the film, we saw Madeleine grab her stomach, and, well, Chekhov's stomach grab, you set that up in Act 1, and there's going to be indigestion or a child later on. As I mentioned earlier on, when I saw this film for the first time, I'd forgotten about the stomach grab earlier on, so this moment really did come as a big shock for me, and I think it does for most people watching this thing for the first time, and everyone quickly puts 2 and 2 together, and this is James Bond's daughter. Right? Well, put a pin in that because we cut to a pensive-looking M fiddling with a bulldog clip. Sadly, he isn't waiting arrest for potentially breaking international law, but rather is hanging out in the, well, I guess it's the Hall of M's. I mean, we see a portrait of Judi Dench's M and Robert Brown's M adorning the walls. I assume that Bernard Lee's portrait is hanging in this hall too, off camera, and as much as I really wish we got a shot of it in the film, I am happy to see Robert Brown's M get some love. I mean, Lee had his portrait viewable previously in The World Is Not Enough, of course. Does it annoy some that Robert Brown's image is appearing here despite it being from a different continuity timeline? Yes, I'm sure it does, but even the first 20 films of this film series barely work on a linear timeline as it is. This is just a little nod for fans of the series, and I appreciate that it's here all the same. This is a really quick thing too, but I do love how Mallory is looking at Judy's portrait, and it is obviously open to interpretation what's happening in this moment, but I've always taken it as him kind of looking at her and feeling guilty for the hard time that he gave her in Skyfall. It's just like he's thinking, yeah, you were right, this ain't easy, is it? That doesn't mean that I don't think the man shouldn't be arrested immediately, or at least removed from any significant position of power in the British Secret Service, but it's a nice moment all the same. So Nomi has a track on Logan Ash based on the lead that Bond gave her earlier, and M has the goal to diss on Bond here for some reason.
Well, your predecessor was less deferential.
Yeah, and thank goodness he was less deferential. I can't imagine what other kind of international treaty breaking stuff you would have had him doing if he hadn't been going off and doing his own thing. Back to Casa de Swan as Madeleine puts Mathilde to bed, and this happens.
She's not yours.
So, lots to say about this. First of all,
She's not yours.
line got audible laughs from every audience I saw this with in cinemas. I think it's a great delivery and a very funny line. Same for the
I have something to show you.
Another child?
line follow-up. It breaks the tension nicely and subverts our expectations of how this scene was going to play, but it does create some issues going forward.
Nothing but problems.
But, Okay, the blue eyes.
Obviously, when she says she's not yours, I take that at face value, meaning that she's not biologically yours. Bond's line referring to eyes kind of backs this up. I mean, he's clearly taking this statement to mean biological too. Of course, there's a double meaning to the phrase she's not yours, as Madeleine could also just not want Bond in either her or her daughter's lives after all this, which is all well and good, but clearly we're being asked to think of this in the biological sense. Also that they can keep the big reveal moment, the big truth moment, for the very end of the film. But this to me is like the first truly unforgivable stumble in a plot line that is staggering like it's just done too many G's in a centrifuge, and I think this whole thing would have been so much cleaner if they just acknowledged here and now that, yeah, this kid is Bond's. I'm not even entirely sure what Bond is supposed to be understanding in this sequence. His mentioning of eyes clearly means that he's thinking of this in biological terms, but after Madeleine's second she's not yours, he kind of straightens up and looks a bit solemn. I think from that he's realizing that she's saying she's not yours in a way to mean back off out of our lives kind of thing, but it's murkying the waters and potentially confusing an audience's understanding. It confused me, certainly the first time that I watched this, and I mean, because, spoiler alert, everyone's first instinct is going to be proven right, and she is indeed Bond's wee lass, but it's really oddly handled, and I don't know what they really get narratively out of keeping it murky like this. Nothing that Bond does throughout the rest of this story would change one iota whether he was confirmed as Matilda's dad here or not, so why confuse the issue? I assume that they wrote it this way because if the child was just confirmed as being Bond's biological daughter here, they would have felt the need to have some kind of heart-to-heart between Bond and Madeleine, and maybe that would have slowed down the film's pace, and maybe they just want to keep things going. They want to push that reveal moment to the very end of the film, but I don't think the final film would have changed all that much if they'd have just had it confirmed here. Like, if Madeleine didn't say she's not yours here, I don't think that the rest of the film would have changed all that much. Bond would still want to go and save Madeleine and the kids, so I don't really know what it gets you other than a kind of a fake reveal moment at the end, which we will come to talking about, of course. Anyway, more on that later. Madeleine takes Bond to her dad's secret room and spills the beans on Safin and their whole shared backstory, how her dad killed his family and so on. I do find it odd that we don't even have a photo of Mr. White in this entire film. I kind of thought that given his prominence to the narrative, some visual representation of him somewhere would have been helpful, particularly to audiences who maybe haven't seen the Craig films since their initial releases, but maybe they spent all of their money on securing the rights to Eva Green's likeness and there just wasn't anything left in the kitty for poor old Jesper Christensen. The pertinent information here is that she reveals that the Safin family had an island where they maintained a poison garden for use in Spectre's various assassination schemes. Bond relays this information to Q and asks him to find out where the island is so he can head there and kill Safin. I would have thought that he'd be heading there to thank him more than anything else, given that the guy is responsible for killing all of Bond's arch enemies, and I mean, we don't even have a real motive for the next stage of Safin's plot yet, so, you know, maybe he really did just want Blofeld dead and is content retiring to live out his days on his poison island mourning his dead family, but no, we gotta go kill him to cover M's arse. The night passes and come morning, Bond is making breakfast for Matilda. I'd have loved it if this was some kind of scrambled eggs that he was whipping up for her, given how much Bond of the books loves his egg dishes, and there are plenty of eggs in the scene right there, but I guess, yeah, pancakes are all good, and apple skin as well. Well, yeah, vitamin C is important, I suppose. This is such a short scene, but it's really nice giving Bond this brief moment of domesticity. I love him in this moment, just looking at Matilda, looking at Madeleine, and you can see that he's kind of thinking, okay, could this be my life now? I think you could get so much more out of this setup, and it's a bit of a shame that the daughter is introduced so late in the film, but for what we get, I do really like these scenes. I think that the young actress playing Matilda is just adorable too. I mean, you don't even often see kids in Bond movies all that much, and when you do, they tend to be either just delighted reaction shots, irritants to be scolded, or money-grubbing elephant floggers. As I say, I wish that she and Craig had more scenes together, but no time for Dad Bond, because the MI6 gang have been doing their homework and located Isle Safin in disputed waters between Russia and Japan. Satellite images show some suspicious activity on the island, so Bond asks how Nomi is doing in tracking down Logan Ash, and not very well apparently, as Daniel Craig has to channel Carol Kane in a real "the calls are coming from inside the house" moment, as it becomes apparent that Logan is very close and more than likely coming for Bond and Madeleine. This prompts the trio to skedaddle, not in the Aston Martin though, oddly enough, but I guess they are in a hurry, so maybe we don't need the additional scene of Bond and Madeleine trying to fit Matilda's child seat into the back of it, or maybe we do actually, that sounds pretty funny. No, as handy as the potential Aston Martin gadgets might be, time is of the essence, so off they go in Madeleine's car. Some beautiful shots here, and good suspense too. I think this scene works really well, and the way the incline of the road is used to reveal the bad guys coming for the heroes is awesome. There's some curious dialogue during this scene though, as Matilda mumbles on in the background about mosquitoes and how one has bitten her. Now, I think that a good chunk of people watching this for the first time probably heard that and thought, okay, well, Chekhov's mosquito bite, this is a plot detail that's coming back later on. Maybe the girl was infected in her sleep, maybe someone injected her, or she was injected with an antidote, or something like that. There's going to be something like that that comes out of this, right? Well, no, sometimes a mosquito bite is apparently just a mosquito bite. So this has no bearing on the plot at all, which I actually think is fine, and I think it's kind of nice having her just chatting away in the back like kids do. It feels very real. It's just that in a movie that is this stuffed full of ideas and there's so many lines and setups and payoffs, it's unusual that this is just idle chatter with no consequence. But no time for your adorableness, Matilda. We've gone a while without an action sequence, so things kick into high gear here as Logan Ash and his men pursue the family through some gorgeous looking terrain. Now, I think that this is a fun and absolutely beautifully photographed scene, but I do wish that there was a bit more variety to some of the action. I feel like Bond dispatches of the various pursuers in much the same way, and there's definitely a car flip too many, but what follows this bit of action is another of my absolute highlights of the film. Bond attempts to lose the pursuers in a foggy forest, dropping Madeleine and Matilda off in a little hut and luring the bad guys away. Madeleine actually gets a real badass moment here too when she shoots a guy, and that moment, actually, the first time I saw this film, that moment got a cheer from the audience. And yeah, I agree, it's great to see her actually getting involved in the action like this. I think Bond looks cool as anything in this coat, like he's really going to work in this scene, executing the drivers with such methodical precision and setting traps and such. The fog is kind of reminding me of like the jungle level from GoldenEye on the N64, and I love how casually he's dodging bullets, and I love, oh boy do I love how he dispatches of Logan Ash. It's obviously a callback to the moment when Roger kicked the car off the cliff in For Your Eyes Only, but I love how Craig acts this. Like, Ash is begging for his life, and Bond is just examining the car, the branch, looking at it like, yeah, is this gonna help me, or will I need to bash his head in with a rock? But no, he just tips the car at him, and I love it. Safin pops up again, seemingly doing his own dirty work, and acquires mother and daughter to take back to his island. Incidentally, there's a shot from the trailers of Safin in a helicopter, so I assume that he may have initially had a bit of a bigger part in this little sequence, but whatever, it works well as is, I think. Bond is picked up by a passing Nomi, who has apparently spent much of the last day just driving around in her lovely Aston Martin a few paces behind Logan Ash. Now, Bond is in no mood for snippy banter as he relays to Nomi that Madeleine and her daughter have both been captured.
I didn't know she had a daughter.
That line really does make you question MI6's surveillance work. I mean, they had an eye on Madeleine. I mean, she was living in London. She was the only person who Blofeld would speak to, so they had a vested interest in her. But no, apparently no one knew that she had a kid, despite her being a valuable asset, as M puts it. And Moneypenny mentions earlier on that they even searched her flat.
They searched her flat. She hasn't been home.
So you'd have thought that someone somewhere would know this fact and possibly relay it to Nomi or Bond or M or Moneypenny, but hey, 5 years passes and this slips right under their noses, apparently. So how is the Madeleine Swan surveillance going? Absolutely nothing unusual to report at all, sir. Though coincidentally, she has lost an awful lot of weight recently. I mean, she was just piling it on for 9 months, and then all of a sudden, gone. Must have joined a gym or something. And her flat? Again, nothing unusual to report at all, sir. Perfectly normal single-woman flat, complete with an extra bedroom painted pink with a tiny bed in it and toys all over the place. Good work, Agent. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to commit some war crimes. War crimes, sir? Did I say war crimes? I meant well-intentioned developmental research into a program that is 100% ethically sound. Airtight. Seeing how much Bond is hurting clearly affects Nomi, who in the next scene relinquishes her 007 status so that James Bond can once again be James Bond 007. I certainly think that this beat could have been fleshed out further if they hadn't stuffed this film with quite as many story threads as they did, but overall, I like it, and I think it's sweet that she arrives at a place of respect for Bond. She effectively decides to put her own ego aside in this moment, and hey, this is Craig's final mission as Bond. Of course, as a fan, I want to see him go out as 007. 7, though admittedly, maybe the filmmakers took the go out part of that a bit too seriously, but we'll get there. Just on the Nomi character, because I know a lot of people feel like she isn't used enough in the film, and I kind of agree that some moments, such as this one, could be fleshed out more, but given that this film is such a smorgasbord of ideas and characters and story concepts, for how much time of the film is spent on her and Bond and their evolving relationship, I actually think she works really well. I also think that this character had such an unfair level of scrutiny in the build-up to the release of the film because of the whole "a black woman is 007" headline thing, which is rife for just clickbait and faux internet outrage, which was also clearly unfounded, and it's just a testament to the media landscape that we live in at the moment, particularly as her whole arc in this film is about kind of like reining it in and losing the ego and respecting James Bond. So when people are like, oh, I don't like her, she's so arrogant, it's like, well, this is kind of the point. She needs to learn to deal with her own arrogance and kind of respect James Bond, which I think works really nicely. I really like this character, I really like Lashana Lynch, and I love that Bond has a partner to go storming the villain's base with. It harkens back to the Roger Moore movies that I love, Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, and then also to Tomorrow Never Dies with Wei Lin. I think this is a great setup, and I love it. The pair meet with Q, who was apparently in such a rush to get here that he hasn't had time to change. He's still in his pajamas, which is such a lovely little detail. I love this Q scene too, by the way. It's such a classic Q scene. It's him equipping the agents for battle with some really nice gadgets, and there's some funny gags. I think that Ben Whishaw is just so brilliant. Please keep doing Q until you're 80 like Desmond Llewellyn did. M gives the agents their threefold mission: confirm the presence of Heracles on the island, kill Obruchev and Safin, and save Madeleine and Mathilde. All really great stuff, and believe me, I am so ready and pumped for a finale, but this is where the film really does go off a cliff for me, and unfortunately there aren't enough contrivatinis left in my mini-barter to save it. We cut to Safin's base, where he meets with Obruchev, who provides Safin with a vial containing swan nanobots, created by use of a hair from Madeleine that Safin pinched from her office earlier on. We're not to know exactly the details of this until later in the film, though, and you may well be distracted by the fact that Safin just casually drops in here the information that Mathilde is indeed Bond's daughter.
You love a killer. You bore his child despite his rejection.
Now, this is really the first time that we have a character properly confirming this little story detail in the dialogue, and I think to us an audience, it's kind of like a, huh? Wait, could you slow down and rewind and expand on that a little bit, please? And they don't. Safin then goes on to ramble about his father's poison garden, which is pretty darn cool looking, though it is obviously very different to the poison garden that we read about in Ian Fleming's You Only Live Twice. I wish that the garden here factored more into the actual plot, and I assume that at some point in the scripting it did before things got changed, but more on this later. So this scene also tries to do its best to establish exactly why Safin has gone out of his way to bring Madeleine and Mathilde here, given that if he'd left them where they were, he'd probably have been better off, but I think that we're supposed to believe that he has some sort of weird connection with Madeleine, or he just wants to acquire a family of his own or something. We'll talk more about this in a bit, but in isolation, I kind of like this scene, and it's probably my favourite bit of Rami Malek in the whole film. Him walking around with the girl in his arms is as creepy as anything. She is such a great little actress. Really get a sense of fear from her. You're wondering what's going to happen next. It's really nice, and of course the scene ends with Madeleine being taken away. Meanwhile, Bond and Nomi fly into Safin's base under the radar using Q's stealthy bird plane. It's a really cool vehicle, and in that proper Q branch of old style, it converts into a mini submarine, which is all really nice stuff. I also just love these scenes of the pair prowling around Safin's base. For all of my story and character issues coming up, I certainly can't fault the film's visual style. It's just stunning. I adore Safin's base. Finally, for the first time in a long while, we actually have a classic Bond villain lair of old and all its fantastic borderline sci-fi.
We're not science fiction, we're in fact science fact.
Okay, science fact, glory. The pair work together really nicely. They have gadgets to use as well. It's wonderful stuff. Story-wise, they bump into Obruchev, who gets a much-deserved beating, and the agents piece together exactly what the whole villain scheme here is, I think. Obruchev has been overseeing the production of nanobots designed to wipe out a good chunk of the world's population. How, who, and why? We're not quite sure, but look, this map goes red, so it must be bad, right? I feel like the film does its best to try and dumb down this whole thing for the sake of audience members like me with...
That was the farm.
This is the factory.
But even with that, I still don't quite get it.
Do you want to put that in English for those of us who don't speak spy?
Because this is nanobots, labeling it as farm and factory feels so odd as they're not organic things, but this water and the people raking it or something, it's almost like they're collecting the nanobots. I mean, do they breed? How are they being generated? Are these technical questions important when we don't even know the villain's actual motives? No, so let's join Bond in his little sit down with Safin, who will hopefully illuminate us all to these details. Spoiler alert, he really doesn't. So this is the classic Bond meets the villain scene. This is usually the scene where everything is laid out and we understand the whys, whether it be increasing the value of personal gold, getting revenge on the British government who betrayed your parents, or just really, really liking the sea, apparently, and wanting people to live in the water. I feel like this scene in this film, though, causes me more confusion than anything else. So right off the bat, Safin is comparing himself to Bond.
James Bond, history of violence, license to kill, vendetta with Ernst Blofeld, in love with Madeleine Swan. I could be speaking to my own reflection.
I love her so much I went more than 20 years without even contacting her in the slightest, just so that she'd forget all about me.
So I think that this whole Safin and Madeleine plot is one of the biggest dropped balls of any story element of any Bond film ever. As an audience, we really need to understand what the deal is with these two characters, because I feel like it is a big part of Safin's villainous motivation, but it's so wishy-washy and unexplained and hazy, and I mean, I think it screams of a script that has gone through multiple hands, and something has been watered down, I assume, over the various different drafts, but quite how this story element was the one that ended up watered down baffles me, because so much of this last chunk of the film kind of depends on understanding what his deal is with her, and it's just not there in the film. Safin being in love with Madeleine makes no sense at all based on what we see in this film. He literally had nothing to do with her for decades, and then only reappears in her life when she provides a useful tool for him to get his revenge on Blofeld. And that whole side of Safin's plot makes complete sense to me, that he would want revenge against Blofeld. The Madeleine thing much less so, and I think it's a casualty of the filmmakers feeling like they need to give the villain some kind of personal connection to one of the film's protagonists, and this can work well, like in Skyfall, where Silver's whole scheme comes down to revenge against M, or it can work poorly, like in Spectre, where Blofeld apparently sets up an entire evil organization to act as a personal troll for James Bond because he blames him for an alienation of parental affections or something. Safin and Madeleine definitely falls into the latter category, and something that needed to track through more of the film if it was to become such a big element of his motivations here at the end. But aside from that, we obviously need to understand, too, why he is so hell-bent on creating a thing that could wipe out a good chunk of the population, and he has dialogue here about how he thinks people effectively want to be told how to live, and how he feels like he's doing them a favour.
People want oblivion, and a few of us are born to build it for them. So here I am, their invisible god, sneaking under their skin.
While just having a god complex and just wanting to destroy the world isn't the greatest of motivations, this is a Bond villain, and don't get me wrong, there are Bond villains of the past with weak motivations or vague motivations that you just kind of roll along with because it's just a fun Bond film. In the novelization of The Spy Who Loved Me, I think Christopher Wood does just this exact thing really well. In that book, Stromberg literally just flat out says, "I want to destroy the world because I can." That's it. Cut and dry, and I think it works in that book because you really get the horror through Bond in that moment when he realizes that that is Stromberg's motivations. Like, there's no bargaining with that. There's no tangible ransom as a last resort to stop the bad guy. He's just stark raving underpants on head bonkers. Here, it's similar, if less succinctly put, and to be honest, bothers me far less than the fumbled Safin and Madeleine love story. However, what does bother me is that Safin seemingly confirms to Bond here that he is indeed Mathilde's dad, and there's hardly any reaction to this at all.
Do you want to die in front of your daughter?
I would have thought that Bond might be like, oh, could you elaborate on that point? I could do with some extra clarification, please. Do you mean that literally? Because I was led to believe not so earlier on, but no, we're dragging this thing out right until the end, apparently. So, on a more positive side, I do really like some of Bond's lines in this scene. I think that the dialogue here is really quite wonderful and eloquent.
I think we are the same. We both know what it feels like to have everything taken from us before we're even in the fight. It would have been nice to have a chance, don't you think?
I love that Matilde is here as a hostage. I love Bond's super quick moves to take out Safin's guards while the villain escapes down a chute with the child. And while all this is going on, Madeleine is having a right day and a half of her own. First, she is being pressured into drinking mind control tea by Primo, but she is able to escape and she meets up with Bond in this moment. Now, if like me, you were a bit confused or perhaps unclear on Safin's motivations, here's another scene to truly make you go, huh? So, Safin has escaped with Matilde and is being flanked by some guards when the kid realizes that she's lost her stuffed animal, so she bites his hand. He puts her down and then tells her that she can jolly well bugger off if she doesn't want his protection, which she does, and he lets her walk away. So I saw this film multiple times in the cinema. Every time that the girl would turn around and walk off, it would get a laugh from the audience. But then you could always sense that the laugh was being cut short when Safin turns around and walks away, because it was like everyone in the cinema is collectively thinking the same thing, namely, what the is going on? Safin makes a thing earlier on about Matilde living with him on the island. Obruchev greets the mother and daughter as Safin's family, so this is all telling you he wants to keep them both there, right? Like, even beyond the fact that having a kid in tow is just like, good collateral in this situation, handy to have a hostage, right? It's bizarre that he's just like, oh, okay, off you go. Now, you might well interpret this as he thinks that she's not exactly going to get too far. Maybe this is him just thinking, well, this is her home too, so she's fine to just wander around as she likes. But as I say, you'd think that he'd realize the value of keeping her close by. Interestingly, there's a snippet from the promotional trailers where we see Safin in this setting raising a gun, and given the similar framing and the background and whatnot, I do wonder if at some point there was a moment here where Safin was contemplating just shooting her, but held off, maybe in an attempted parallel to the opening where he also spared Madeleine's life. And if that was the intent, I might well have liked such a scene, but it isn't in the final film. Maybe it was deemed too intense, like putting the little kid in such immediate danger, and maybe that would have increased the age certification rating or something. I don't really know, but at the moment it's a completely pointless little beat, because right after this, the girl immediately meets up with Bond and Madeleine again anyway. Given that hardly any time passes between Safin running off with Matilde and her getting back to her parents, I would have thought it more economical to just have her escape Safin in this scene rather than waste time with an extra couple of scenes that do nothing of her, like, escaping Safin and then meeting up with her parents again. This, to me, reeks of an unfinished script. We know that Rami Malek only had a certain amount of time to dedicate to the film, and I think it shows that pretty much everything with his character is causing all of these logic and story issues. But this just stands out to me as something that was probably filmed, and then other scenes were changed later on, and they didn't have the time to finesse it, so they're patching up the holes in the hull of the storyboat, but it's a damn CVAC drill of plot contrivances coming at the thing, and good luck trying to stop it. Right, so something else that happens in this scene is this line.
The first shipment is on the dock, ready for pickup, Doctor.
It was much rumoured in the build-up to the film that Rami Malek's character would, at some point, be revealed to be a reimagining of Dr. No, similar to how Christoph Waltz's Oberhauser preferred to go by the name Blofeld in the previous film's Pointless as Anything twist. The fact that the mask from the pre-titles is called a No mask, the Nehru jacket, the crab key design callbacks, the Eastern influences, the film is called No Time to Die, for goodness sake, and this line sticks out so much because nowhere else in this film is he referred to as Dr. Safin. Now, given how much on-set rewriting was going on, it wouldn't surprise me if at some point he was indeed going to be revealed to be a Dr. No, but they'd pull back on it. And thank the Fleming they did. I definitely didn't need another completely pointless villain name change towards the end of the film that would have no bearing on the story or the plot or anything. It would totally just be like,
you may have known me so far as Lucifer Safin, but I prefer to go by Dr. No these days for a variety of reasons, which I shall relay to you now.
Right, could I have my daughter back, please? However, the fact that that line is left in there is curious, to say the least. It's something that could have easily been addressed in additional dialogue recording. It's hard to tell who's even saying it out of Safin's goons. They could have just removed the doctor and replaced it with sir or boss house or whatever, but it is here, and I'm guessing that that's deliberate, so I just wonder if it's supposed to be a little nod to the original film, or is it indeed a nod to the rumours? Curious is how I'd best describe its inclusion here. So just one more thing on this little scene. Safin and his men are apparently on their way to meet with some ships coming to collect the nanobots. These entities are referred to as buyers.
Our first buyers are arriving.
And for me, this just further murkies Safin's motivations, because, well, this whole scheme is for profit, then? I mean, if he is just cuckoo basket case a few sandwiches short of a picnic in the head, would it not be simpler to just have him carrying out this scheme for his own insane reasons? Why is he selling this stuff? It implies that he's not even really in charge of the distribution of them, and that's weird. I'm pretty sure that these buyer ships are just included to give the film some kind of ticking clock, like, the good guys need to win, otherwise bad stuff happens in T-5 minutes or whatever, but it's at the detriment to an already relatively murky motivation. I guess it all does just come down to the fact that he's mad, but he also really likes money. So elsewhere on the island, Nomi gets an absolutely badass moment where she gets to kill Obruchev after he turns out to be a racist. I mean, who'd have thought? He seemed like such a swell guy.
Do you know what time it is?
What?
Time to die.
Is it a cheesy line? Yes. Do I love it? Yeah. Right, so off the island meanwhile, MI6 are feeling the pressure of the Navy, the Russians and the Japanese, who are perhaps understandably breathing down their necks because what the hell are you guys doing flying around this island in this disputed territory? I would have thought that it'd even perhaps be in MI6's best interest to attempt to form some kind of international unity over this issue, but I guess that doing so would mean that M might have to come clean, and Jesus forbid that that might happen, that he might actually have to face some kind of penance for his role in breaking international treaties. But there may be an alternative reason why they don't want any other nation to get involved, which we will get to soon. The Bond family, wow, it feels weird saying that, well, they all meet up with Nomi, and it isn't just me who's weirded out by the mention of family, actually. This is one of my favourite moments of the film from Bond.
Madeleine, Mathilde, am I,
Bond relays to MI6 that they're going to need to blow the whole island to Kingdom Come before he and Nomi get Madeleine and Mathilde to a boat. While I'm ashamed to say that I didn't pick up on this on my first viewing, everything about this moment screams that Bond is going to his death. The swelling music, the lines, this shot is such a and he'll never see them again kind of shot, and you should probably know from this alone that either Bond is going to his death or these two are going to get out into the middle of the sea and realise that there's a hole in the boat and meet a watery end, but it should be clear how this is going to go. Not to me though, who was blissfully unaware during that first viewing. James Bond's gonna save the day! Not sure it's entirely clear why Nomi has to be the one to drive the boat to get Madeleine and Mathilde to safety, given that her and Bond are supposed to be contemporaries and she's actually getting paid to do this, so you think that he'd be the one to go off with his own family? Well, she takes care of heading back into the base to open the blast doors in anticipation of a missile strike. But outside of the logic of the film, obviously this is a Bond film, we need a climax with Bond in it, so for what we're gonna do, it really wouldn't be the same if Nomi was the one doing all this stuff. So take a glub of contrivatini, off she goes with mother and daughter while Bond heads back inside the base. I must admit, the contrivance to get Bond back into the action here is forgiven somewhat quickly, given how badass the action is for these next few minutes. I know some fans don't love seeing Bond go commando like this, machine gun in tow, obviously, flashbacks to Tomorrow Never Dies again, and I love that film and I love this whole action sequence. Craig is badass as anything, and there are so many moments here to love, from him blowing up the control room, to this gun barrel homage, to the rainfall of grenades, to the Wanna action sequence on the stairwell where it all looks like it's done in one take, which is all kinds of amazing. This is obviously Craig's final big action moment as Bond, and it's brutal, it's brilliant, the music with the bum 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 bum. I'm having flashbacks to awesome video game action sequences set in stairwells like in Agent Under Fire and Nightfire, World Is Not Enough. I love this sequence so much, and it's just a perfect cherry on top that it ends with Bond taking out Primo with his Q-branch EMP watch and a typically Bondian quip.
Really blew their mind.
Bond makes it to the control room, and I always find it funny how Q is giving him some instructions on what to press and whatnot, and Bond just goes ahead and starts flicking switches and stuff, seemingly at random, but it does the job, and so the missile launch is ordered. So a big reason of why this strike needs to happen now, apparently, is that these buyer ships are approaching, and this is the ticking clock to explain why they need to launch the missiles right this very second, rather than, I don't know, just giving it the 10 minutes it's going to take for Bond to actually get off the island. The thing that makes this a particularly potent contrivatini to swallow is the fact that we're dealing with entities that we have no idea who they are. They're all off screen, and the plot is supposed to be very dependent upon this all of a sudden, and who are they? Well, earlier on, when Bond and Nomi are watching a map displaying the nanobot's intended targets, you'll notice that some continents are harder hit than others. Asia getting off mostly scot-free. I'm not sure what we're supposed to take from this, other than maybe, is this implying that the buyers are other governments looking to get in on this tech? But, I mean, you, Europe in particular, apparently on the basis of this distribution. I'm totally screwed if this is going to be the case. And now we reach the film's denouement, and buckle up, folks, because there's a hell of a lot of complaining coming your way. Bond is making his way out of the base when he spots Matilda's stuffed toy Doo-Doo on the floor. Just as an aside, I love that this toy can be glimpsed in the pre-credit sequence too. Presumably it's a hand-me-down from Madeleine, which is really quite sweet. Anyway, our hero pauses to collect the toy when the blast doors start to close again. As previously established, the blast doors need to be open when the missiles strike, otherwise they'll bounce right off them because they're just really bloody strong, apparently. So down what's left of your contrivatini and we'll move on. I said down it! But better get yourself another one poured sharpish, because as Bond is running back to the control room to close the doors again, Safin appears from the side and shoots Bond and actually hits him several times. Considering how much ammo Bond dodges in this entire film, even when he's not moving at speed, it's jarring as anything to see Safin get shots in while Bond is running full pelt. But hey, this leads to a scuffle between the two, with Bond snapping Safin's arm in a heck of an awesome moment. But in the middle of this scuffle, the villain smashes the vial of swan nanobots in Bond's face, and thus the stage is set for the ending that is a result of the many, many contrivatinis throughout this film. But first we have Safin explain to Bond and the audience exactly what this all means, and I'll just say, I hate this scene. I hate it so much. I hate Safin's dialogue. I hate the delivery. He's waxing lyrical, and I'm just cringing. I'm cringing so much that my buttocks have folded in on themselves and the lower half of my body is starting to disappear. If the scene continued, I may well have vanished completely, but fortunately Bond puts the villain out of our misery and makes his way up the stairs, blood pouring out of him, or at least as much blood as the age rating certification will allow, to reopen the blast doors and accept his fate on the roof as the missiles rain down. Just a few words of warning before we proceed, because I just want to say that if you enjoy this ending, if it has the desired emotional impact for you, if you think that it is the perfect way to end this story, to end this actor's tenure as Bond, then great. I am genuinely really happy for you. I've said this multiple times in other videos, that if there is something in a Bond film that other people like that I don't like very much, then all I can be is jealous. I'm just jealous that you end this film on some kind of a high note, because every time I watch it and every time it comes down to this ending, I hate it. Once it becomes clear what they're about to do with Bond, all of the contrivances that we've had to buy throughout the film have clearly been to facilitate this moment. Bond gets on the wire to Q in order to reiterate to the audience that once you have the nanobots in you, it's forever. It's eternal. Better start eating for 2000 for the rest of your life, because these things are in there for good. The only reason that they set it up earlier on is so that they can put Bond in a completely hopeless situation that he is in here, but it feels so inauthentic to me. Why? Well, for a start, nanobots are tech, and Bond has his EMP watch, so, I mean, just why not just use that to nullify them? But more than that, it's just really weird that Q is just like, nope, that's it. Absolutely no, it's done and dusted thing, it's eternal, that's it, there's no coming back from it, and it's like, do you want to have a go? Why not abort the missiles that are heading to the island, and then maybe send some more missiles to destroy those buyer ships, and then send Nomi back with the boat, wrap Bond in cling film, get him off the island, and then maybe figure out some way of getting them out of him? It's weird that it's presented as such a cut and dry thing. Where's the can-do attitude, people? I feel like if this had been a virus rather than nanobots, it would have made more sense. In the opening credits we see DNA, we see vines growing inside a person's body, and maybe if this was a virus that changed a person's genetic makeup when they were infected or something like that, maybe I'd have had a better time buying it, because nanobots just seem like a tech thing that Q would be able to sort out in a few minutes if you gave him a chance. I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but apparently earlier on in the production it was indeed some kind of virus, and this would have made so much more sense given Safin's garden, the poison garden, his family's history as Safin's poisoners. It feels like such a natural fit, but at some point during production production it was changed to be nanobots. And by the way, as of me making this video, there's no real evidence to suggest that this change was motivated as a result of the pandemic breaking out, nor can I imagine that it would have been feasible for them to change such a thing, given the lockdowns and getting the cast together and all that kind of thing. Like, if there were substantial reshoots, we would have known about it. No, this was a decision made during production, and it's to the film's detriment, I think. But even if they did take, just 2 seconds to think about it and actually get Bond off the island, won't Madeleine and Mathilde be in danger? Bond certainly wouldn't be able to touch the pair until they had some kind of solution figured out. Oh, and not only that, as established earlier on, the nanobots will actively hop from person to person until they find their intended targets. So, Bond pops to his local pub for a Sunday roast, passes the nanobots onto the landlord, who then passes it onto a customer, who passes it onto a friend, who passes it onto their partner, who just so happens to be Madeleine's secretary, and 2 dead swans is what we get. So, there we go, they've covered all the bases with this nanobot stuff, haven't they? And I'm only saying that semi-sarcastically because yes, if you do take all of the information that this film is giving you at face value, yeah, it's there. They tell you that the nanobots are eternal, so that's the reason why he can't leave the island. And it's not that I'm complaining about details not being in the film, it's the fact that I'm saying that I don't find them very convincing. It's their film, they can write it however they damn well please, but the fact that all of this setup purely exists to get us to a point where Bond feels that there is no hope just feels so inauthentic to me. But it's not just the nanobots. Oh no, he's been shot up pretty bad too, and we have close-up shots of blood dripping on the floor, and if Chekhov's blood dripping is anything to go by, then this is surely a sign that he's dead meat, right? But the fact that it's this villain to achieve this, Safin, who has had barely any screen time, whose motivations are muddled at best, the fact that this is the guy to do what has never been done before and kill James Bond is baffling to me. I think that on a first watching I had issues with Safin for all of the reasons that I stated previously, but on rewatching the film my dissatisfaction with him grows and grows, probably because I feel like the contrivances that really hurt this film all stem from the lack of clarity regarding this character and his goals. But even if they do wrap Bond in cling film, get him off the island, cure his nanobots and treat his gunshot wounds, there is still, of course, the matter of the approaching buyers that are coming in to collect the nanobots. The ships that we see in, one shot, crewed by unknown people to take away the nanobots to infect the rest of the world. Well, there's them to think about too, so no way to abort the missiles now, I'm afraid. I do find it kind of hilarious, though, when the island is bombed at the end and the ships do, full-on 90-degree turns in a matter of seconds once they see that the island is exploding. It's pretty funny. What about sending other missiles to take out the ships themselves rather than the island? Well, we can't do that either because the island itself has to go, otherwise the Russians and or the Japanese might get there and see what's been going on and be jolly cross at M for his role in this whole debacle, which will reflect badly on Britain, and I think we're supposed to be invested in this, but if I had my way, this guy would be in Belmarsh prison. I hear they have a vacancy. Then there's the fact that I think we're supposed to believe that this is the first time that Madeleine actually admits to Bond that Mathilde is indeed his biological daughter.
She does have your eyes.
And that has been so badly handled throughout the film that it doesn't feel like a reveal, but it feels like it's being treated as a reveal, but both the audience and Bond, and as well as everyone else in the film, seems to realise that this is a situation way before, so I'm just not really sure what we're supposed to be making of this moment. Is this Madeleine trying to comfort Bond? Don't worry, I'll raise her fully well knowing that you were her dad all along? I don't understand it. But anyway, have I got them all? Have I got all the contrivances that we need to swallow to actually buy the emotional impact of this ending? Well, I'm sorry, but my contrivatini is empty. There are no ingredients left in the house for another one. There's no ingredients left in a 10-mile radius for another one. And even if there was another one available, I think I've swallowed too much. I can't swallow any more. First time for everything. Oi. And sure, this might not bother you at all, because all of the reasons leading up to Bond's death are valid, if not well represented on screen. If you're happy buying lines about the danger of the approaching ships and the tensions with Russia and Japan, it's there, it's in the script, and believe me, I'm much less discerning when it comes to a lot of other Bond plots. Stromberg, again, dude just really loves water, and I don't need to know more than that. And I think that's because for the most part the Bond series exists as pure fun entertainment, and for that I can shrug my shoulders at contrivances and the occasional plot hole, because so long as I'm having fun, I can do that. Here, because it's trying to do something more than that, they want me to be emotional, they want me to be devastated by how this sequence of events has led to this, and as soon as you try to provoke those emotions out of me, I'm sorry, you need to earn that. And the thing is, this series has earned that many times in the past. Tracy, Vesper, Judi Dench's M, I have shed tears during each of these scenes over the years, but here, I'm just arms folded. This does nothing for me on an emotional level because the thing is so messy and the excuses are just piled high on top of each other and everything is running so fast that they hope that you're not asking any questions. That to me, the end result just doesn't feel earned. Okay, if you're still with me after that, believe it or not, I do have some nice things to say about the ending of this film. The amount of people I know and comments I've seen, reviews and so on, I understand and appreciate that this does work for a lot of people. I know this moves some people to tears, and while I can't say that that has ever really happened to me, on my third or fourth viewing of the film, this line really tugged firmly on my heartstrings, and dare I say, a small tear did form in my eye.
I'm not gonna make it.
And I think a good deal of this is down to performance. Craig is sensational here. He performs this with such sincerity and sadness, and also a genuine fear of what death is gonna be. It's a complex set of emotions that he has to deliver in such a short space of time, and I think he's phenomenal. I think the rest of the cast are really great in this moment too, but Ben Whishaw and Lea Seydoux knock it out of the park. They are giving this their alls, as is Hans Zimmer's score. It's incredibly powerful and befittingly epic. The whole sequence looks beautiful. I think this is one of the most gorgeous looking Bond films there is overall. And again, I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to convince anyone over to my point of view. If this works for you, great. I'm jealous that you're getting an emotional response from something that doesn't work for me, and this isn't even like a tit for tat kind of thing. I've had many a great conversation with Bond fans who really love this film and many who really hate this film, and particularly this whole thing about Bond dying, and those conversations helped me realize that my issues with it aren't going to be rectified by someone saying, "Oh yes, but you see, they say this in the script, so therefore your negative opinion is invalid." There are allusions and lines here and there to grab hold of if you want to say that this is a great, airtight script, but for me, nope. I think to boil all this down, for me, my main issue is that this feels like a story that was written backwards. And indeed, interviews with the creatives since the film was released have seemingly confirmed that yes, Daniel Craig and Barbara Broccoli wanted to end the film with Bond dying, and when Cary Fukunaga came on board, they were all, "This is our ending!" And to Fukunaga's credit, his line on that was that Bond dying is not an ending in and by itself. That's a result, and you need to craft the ending. You need to craft the story to lead, to build to that moment. But I think that that shows. Sometimes in really great films, you forget that the thing is even being written. Like, it just feels like the characters themselves are driving everything forward. Here, there are too many things to me that are vague or unexpanded upon or tenuous, and the result of a lot of these things is to essentially contrive the story to get to a point where you're to accept this fate, and as a result, I can't lose myself in the story, because when I'm watching it on screen, I'm thinking of poor Cary Fukunaga in a hotel room, tasked with the job of having to fill all these holes and juggle all these plates to try and make this feel inevitable, when, to be honest, it's something that I can't say I ever particularly wanted to see on screen anyway, Bond dying. So the fact that the film is having to work overtime to manufacture all of these reasons to get to this point, it's exhausting, and I'm tired for it. So, Bond dies here, and yes, he does die. His vitals go flat. We see him incinerated before our eyes. I don't think that there's any way around that fact. He's dead, and we have a couple of scenes to follow to wrap up the film, starting with a scene with the MI6 gang. M reads a quote from Jack London, something that Fleming used in his own writing, and everyone drinks to Bond, and then it's back to work. This also I find a little disappointing, just because this is such a momentous thing, like killing off James Bond, and I get it. The point of this is that this is spy work, it's espionage, it's undercover stuff. Of course, Bond isn't going to have a state funeral and a minute's silence across the nation, because this is all covert stuff, but it just feels so odd that it's so muted, especially compared with a previous Bond funeral that we've seen in the series, with You Only Live Twice. That felt like a more befitting funeral for a naval commander, and even if they did just do a smaller scale version of that, obviously without his body, but just some kind of service, even if it is just Moneypenny and a few tearful restaurateurs. I think I might have liked that a bit more. And then the final capper is, of course, mother and daughter driving the Aston Martin through the hills leading to Matera, where Madeleine begins to tell Mathilde the story about a man named Bond. James Bond. The kid smiles, and I need to just stress again, I think this kid actor she's fantastic. She's very cute, she's brilliant throughout this entire film, but this shot is just so soppy. The smile, it has me cringing again, and by this point I'm so folded in on myself that I think that all is left of me is my head and a pair of buttocks. And then they play the Louis Armstrong song from Majesty's Secret Service, and I'm just done. I'm gone. Sorry. This song is so synonymous with that George Lazenby film, and repurposing it here, obviously tying in with the lines referencing All the Time in the World throughout the film. Maybe I'd have liked it more if this was a cover by a different artist, or even just an instrumental or something, but it just confounds the ultimate bum note that this film ends on for me. And why the hell are they even in Matera? Is Madeleine just heading back there because she doesn't feel like she got her money's worth the last time? Okay, I do like that we essentially end on the visual of a gun barrel type circle and it fades to black. That's quite fitting, but otherwise, blah, I can't believe that this is the way they end this film. And boy, this video's stupidly long. This really got out of hand. That's No Time to Die. Excuse me while I collapse.
Still rolling. You still there? Are you awake? Wake up.
You know, there's a Bond film tradition that I don't know if anyone who isn't a die-hard Bond fan even really knows about. Probably even certainly doesn't even care about it. But at the end of every Bond film, there is a variation on the phrase, James Bond will return somewhere in the credits. This started out as something that they would do in the early days to announce the title of the next film. So, thank you for watching Goldfinger, come back for Thunderball kind of thing. And then later on down the line, certainly when they started running out of Ian Fleming titles, they stopped doing it. But there was always James Bond will return in the credits, usually towards the end, sometimes at the beginning. I don't know if it even really means that much to many people because it is something of a given. Like, yes, of course James Bond is gonna come back. It's been many decades of this film series now. Of course they're gonna keep on making more. But by God, I don't think I have ever been so tense in my entire life at the prospect of 4 relatively, until now, insignificant words appearing on the screen as the first time I saw No Time to Die in cinemas. I'm not sure if killing off Bond at the end of a Bond movie is brave, daring, stupid, crazy, or a combination of all of those things, but honestly, all my issues with No Time to Die come down to that decision. All of my issues with the plot are the things that are being layered in to support that moment. The reason this film exists is because they wanted to kill off Craig's Bond at the end, and the hoops that they have to jump through to try and sell that to an audience, the idea that this is how this particular story has to end despite this guy escaping dozens, hundreds of implausible situations over the decades. This scenario is the one that he just can't escape from, and I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. The contrivances are so heavy and they're piled so high that the supports are buckling under the pressure and it completely caves in on itself for me, and I'm sorry to say that I have really no emotional impact this ending, and that's, you know, I can't believe I'm saying that about my favourite cinematic hero is being killed off in a film for the first time, and I feel nothing when I look at previous Bond films. Judi Dench's M, I shed a tear when she died. Vesper, even outside of Bond, like, I'm not against the trope of killing the protagonist off at the end of the film. I look at Avengers Endgame, I look at Logan, really love those films and really like how they handle killing off some of the heroes in those films, and I can't believe that it's completely lost on me with James Bond. I've learned a lot of things about myself and how I talk about films as a result of the conversations that I've had about No Time to Die, because I think so much of your own personal enjoyment is going to depend on your own personal gauge of contrivance. If you hear nanobots are eternal and just accept that, then you're good to go. If you're okay with Safin's Madeleine obsession being this relatively unclear thing, you'll be fine. And maybe I would be too in a different context. Hey, I am with a lot of Bond films. I know that there's stuff about Skyfall that some people can't swallow and can't go with. Silver's whole escape plan is really contrived, but I can go with it because I'm enjoying the film enough to that point that I'm happy to go along for the ride. But here, it's just the realization that all of these elements are are kind of retrofitted, or feel retrofitted into the story, because they have to end with Bond dying, because that's what they want to do. I find it frustrating because there's so much more here that I do adore. To speak broadly about the quality of filmmaking, I think it's a marvel. The locations, stunts, direction, cinematography, costume sets, the music, it's an absolute joy. The craftsmanship is incredible. This is one of the best made, best looking Bond films ever. It's certainly cinematography-wise, it's up there with Skyfall, I would say, too, The Living Daylights, Majesty's Secret Service, You Only Live Twice. Purely on a sensory kind of level, this film is terrific. I do really love seeing James Bond the dad, and I wish that there was more time in this film to flesh out those ideas. It's obviously picking up a direct thread from one of the Ian Fleming novels, where we understand that James Bond has indeed fathered a child. It's not really ever fully explored in those books either, so I guess, okay, fine, I guess it's not going to be explored here either. But I think it's fascinating that when it comes to talking about this film, that particular plot thread is often overlooked, and it's crazy because I think back to, in the build-up to this film, thinking, like, of all the things, like, I was really not expecting it, and it feels like it should be the main talking point of the thing, that they made James Bond a dad, but just everything is overshadowed by what they do in the last 5 minutes, and I think that's a real shame. I don't want to dog on the writing specifically, because I think specifically it's the plotting that bothers me, because I do think that some of the dialogue here, it's some of the most witty and quotable dialogue in all of Bond. Individual scenes have great lines and exchanges, it's funny and bright, and I love how stuffed full of characters this thing is. I think that the vast majority come off really well. Q and Nomi are highlights for me, but I think that Craig in particular just excels here. He's a delight to watch. Yes, he's doing a lot more talking and emoting than his previous Bond performances, but I think he's witty, I think he's sharp, I think he's brutal, I think he's funny when he needs to be. I don't think it's his most Fleming-esque Bond performance. I think I would probably give that trophy to Skyfall out of all of them. As a lead character in an action movie, I think he ticks all the boxes, really excels. I think he's a brilliant actor. My main issues are, of course, with the plot, specifically towards the second half of the film, and a lot of that stems from Safin's goals being simultaneously vague and simple. I've heard the filmmakers and even fans of the film almost evenly describe his plans in, on the one hand, these very flowery terms, so much open to interpretation, all that kind of stuff. And also I've heard people just boil it down to, well, he's just got a god complex, and that's it, and he's in love with Madeleine. And I appreciate that we are told these things. The problem is that I don't believe what I'm being told, and I feel like so much of this falls down because of how his objectives are being figured out backwards from the point of Bond dying at the end. So some of his goals wind up feeling nonsensical for me, but as I say, I appreciate that there is stuff here to cling on to if you want to take the stance that his scheme makes sense. As I say, I think it's down to an individual's taste and propensity to accept what you're being told in this given situation. And I'm not saying that snobbishly. I can swallow a good few contrivatini, I dare say more than most when it comes to Bond. I hope that this video has served to give a broad overview of my many mixed emotions regarding this film, because I feel like how I feel about the ending kind of overshadows every other opinion I have about the stuff that precedes it, and I think that that is a real shame, because I'm not overall negative about this film. I think if I were to rank all the films right now, it would probably come slap bang in the middle, if not slightly lower than some others, and certainly judging it against other Bond actors' final Bond films, it's well, I guess second to License to Kill, maybe? And to that point, I am happy that it works as a final wrap-up, as a showcase for Daniel Craig's talents as James Bond in a way that none of the other Bonds, none of them ever really had that same opportunity. But then Craig's entire era became a retroactive saga by the end, which perhaps makes it more difficult to think of this film exclusively on its own terms. It attempts to take the previous 4 films, well, okay, 3 at least, sorry Quantum, and provide an emotionally satisfying conclusion to this entire journey. Craig's performance brings baggage from previous installments and I'm genuinely surprised that they did a relatively good job of tying a bow on elements from previous films. His relationship with Vesper, his conflict with Blofeld, relationship with Madeleine. I mean, it's crazy to think what they might have had to do with this story had Leia Sadu decided that, yeah, you know what, I don't want to come back for another one after all. And if there is one thing that I do like about killing off Bond at the end, it does mean that we are set up for a completely fresh new slate when it comes to whoever will follow in Craig's footsteps. It's the most definitive ending to any Bond's tenure, and indeed, the fact it was originally conceived as an ending is nice. We knew this was going to be Craig's final Bond film, and indeed, it does feel like a true farewell to Craig, who I would say has been a pretty damn great James Bond, all things considered. While my own proclivities, you know, if you watch any video on this channel, you will know that I lean more towards light-hearted Bond. I like Roger Moore, I like Pierce Brosnan, but Craig's performance is so expertly malleable. Like, he can do the more campy stuff in this film in the Cuba scene, as well as tug on the heartstrings, confessing undying love to Madeleine, and that's a real skill. I think overall Craig himself has been an absolute credit to this series, and his popularity extending beyond a good deal of his predecessors means that he's leaving very large boots to fill. Very large, charred boots. If you have made it to the end of this incredibly long, in-depth review of No Time to Die, then cheers, I salute you, I drink to you, thank you very much for watching. I often talk about how this channel is very much my my online soapbox when it comes to talking about James Bond, because I just have too many opinions about these films, apparently. And this video certainly took that to the extreme. I'm pretty sure if this was a literal soapbox that I was stood on talking in public, someone would have come along after about 20 minutes and just kicked it out from under me and thrown it in the Thames or something like that. So, thank you for watching. I hope that you have found this video to be amusing and possibly even a little bit interesting. I always really like it when reading constructive comments from people who have slightly different opinions to me as well, when they say, like, you know, oh, I don't really agree with you, I really liked it or disliked it or whatever, but I enjoyed the video all the same. So if that's you, please do feel free to leave me a comment down below. And hey, leave me a comment if you agree with me too. Feel free. Yes, you can also drop a like on this video if you care to do so. You can subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. That would be magnificent. And of course, there is the Mrs. Bell notification button. Also below, you can find links to my various social media pages, including my Twitter page, my Instagram page, my Facebook page, and my Patreon page, for those of you who want to go one extra step in supporting this channel. So please do head below and check out those links if you care to do so. So with all that out of the way, I suppose the only thing that I can think of to say to truly wrap up this review of my feelings of No Time to Die is to just say to Honorary Commander Daniel Craig, cheers, I salute you, thank you for being a brilliant Bond, and I mean that quite sincerely. Here's to what comes next, folks. Daniel Craig is so never watching this video.